Hello, Lore Masters! Tonight our chronicle covers the 15 most powerful enchantments in Skyrim, and exactly the kind of gear you should infuse with their glowing, volatile runes. Picture the frozen tundras and the ash-choked skies of Solstheim, the heavy, rhythmic hum of an arcane forge vibrating deep within your chest as you hammer raw magic itself into cold steel. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a trip to Cold Harbour, or even a brisk midnight stroll through the Rift, without some serious enchanted gear to keep the local fauna from turning your ribcage into a macabre xylophone. So, before you overthink it, please subscribe. Please drop a comment letting me know your current location and local time. It is always a profound pleasure to see just how far our little campfire reaches into the dark. Now, settle in, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind howls off the sea of ghosts, carrying with it the bitter sting of Red Mountain's pulverized innards. The Dragonborn trudges through the knee-deep, suffocating grey drifts of Solstheim's southern coast, leaving a solitary trail that the relentless ash will erase in mere moments. In the distance, the ruined, crumbling battlements of Fort Frostmoth loom against a bruised and oppressive sky. It is here, amidst the shambling ash spawn and the buried memories of the East Empire Company, that the first jewel of our arcane crown is hidden. Deep within the bowels of this forsaken fortress waits General Falx Carius, a man who is literally too angry to die, resurrected by misguided necromancy and sustained by a heartstone glowing violently in his hollow chest. He wields a weapon of terrifying renown. This is our core in-game fact for the evening. General Carius holds the Champion's Cudgel, a unique Imperial warhammer that possesses the only native source of chaos damage in the entire game. Claiming this prize is no small feat, as Carius hits with the concussive force of a falling meteor. But once his second life is brutally extinguished, the hammer belongs to the victor. But to master this power, one must first destroy its vessel. Picture the Dragonborn standing before an arcane enchanter, the air thrumming with unseen frequencies. Placing the heavy, blood-stained cudgel upon the altar, they channel their magicka, pulling the enchantments apart thread by glowing thread. The physical hammer shatters into 1,000 useless splinters, a priceless artifact permanently erased from the annals of history, all for the raw knowledge contained within its soul. The Dragonborn absorbs this chaotic essence, feeling the burn of fire, the biting chill of frost, and the sharp, metallic tang of shock, all coursing through their veins at once. Chaos damage is a delightfully malevolent piece of arcane engineering. When applied to a weapon, it rolls a 50% chance to inflict fire damage, an independent 50% chance to inflict frost damage, and yet another 50% chance to inflict shock damage on every single strike. Sometimes you only singe your opponent, sometimes you freeze them, but occasionally the cosmic dice align, and you deliver all three elements simultaneously. It is a spectacular lottery of suffering, and frankly, a bandit's basic medical insurance simply does not cover spontaneous triple elemental combustion. Yet, to truly break the boundaries of mortal power, this chaotic enchantment needs a proper home. Iron is too mundane, ebony is too rigid, Daedric is too deeply tied to the realms of Oblivion to harmonise with the elements of Mundus. No, for this, the Dragonborn must seek out Stalhrim. Stalhrim is a material shrouded in profound mystery and ancient ritual. Delving into our obscure lore for the evening, we find that Stalhrim is not merely magical ice, as many commoners in Windhelm might ignorantly claim. According to the Skarl and texts like Children of the Allmaker, Stalhrim is enchanted ice inextricably linked to ancient Atmaran and Nordic burial practices. It was used to encase the honoured dead, protecting their physical forms from the defilement of necromancers and the ravages of time. It is in essence magic made manifest, perhaps the crystallised breath of the Allmaker, or the hardened spiritual residue of the ancient heroes it protects. Mining it requires an ancient Nordic pickaxe, a tool specifically forged to break the sacred seal of these tombs without shattering the underlying magic. And so, the Dragonborn basically robs a sacred graveyard, chips away the protective, holy ice of ancient Atmaran heroes, and melds it to a hilt to beat up local wildlife. Truly a selfless champion of the people. But it is at the forge where the true synergy reveals itself. When the Dragonborn hammers the Stalhrim into a weapon, let us imagine a massive jagged battle axe that smokes with ambient cold. the intrinsic properties of the ancient ice begin to warp the enchantments placed upon it. Stalhrim naturally amplifies all frost enchantments by a flat 25%. This is a known, respected property of the material. However, because chaos damage contains frost as one of its 3 core components, the arcane lattice of the enchantment cannot be separated. The Stalhrim's magical resonance bleeds into the fire and the shock as well, magnifying the entire volatile package by 25%. This mechanical interaction is the subject of endless fascination. Fans still debate whether this massive mathematical explosion, where combining Stalhrim, chaos damage and the destruction skill tree perks like augmented flames, frost and shock, multiplies the damage to astronomical levels, is a deliberate lore feature representing the volatile nature of raw magic reacting to ancient atma and ice, or simply a hilariously broken oversight in the creation engine. Did the developers intend for the Dragonborn to strike with the wrath of a demigod? Or is this just an engine quirk that Todd Howard allowed to persist because it is, frankly, incredibly fun? We may never have a definitive answer, but the result remains the same. The application of this perfectly crafted Stalhrim battle axe is a masterclass in visceral destruction. When the Dragonborn swings this weapon, the air itself screams. Imagine a towering, heavily armoured Reaver charging forward, high on skooma and bloodlust. The massive ice blade connects with the Reaver's chestplate. The impact is deafening. In a fraction of a second, the chaos enchantment triggers perfectly. The Reaver's flesh flash boils inside his armour from the fire, while simultaneously the marrow inside his bones drops to absolute zero, expanding and fracturing his skeletal structure. Concurrently, a massive surge of high-voltage electricity courses through his nervous system, causing his muscles to violently contract and snap his own limbs. The resulting gore is a chaotic, smoking pile of frozen ash and shattered metal. It is horrific. It is magnificent. It is the ultimate all-in-one package for the discerning adventurer who simply cannot decide which specific war crime they wish to commit today. They are a walking natural disaster, leaving a trail of hyper-frozen, electrocuted cinders across the island. This devastating output transforms the wielder into an unstoppable force, tearing through the physical resistances of nearly any creature unfortunate enough to cross their path. Dragons, vampires, Daedric princes, none are immune to the sheer, overwhelming mathematics of chaos damage wrapped in Stalhrim. But while erasing an enemy from existence with a single swing is immensely satisfying, sometimes you don't want to kill them immediately. Sometimes you want them to suffer, to pause, to watch helplessly as their doom approaches. Sometimes raw elemental fury needs to be swapped out for total humiliating control, leaving your enemies entirely at your mercy as their muscles lock in a terrifying rigidity. The roaring elemental fury of chaos damage is a brutal symphony, a cacophony of shattered ice, boiling blood, and snapping electricity. But as the seasoned Dragonborn knows all too well, there is an entirely different, arguably far more terrifying kind of satisfaction found in total deafening silence. Imagine the scenario, if you will. A towering orc bandit chief clad in heavy, poorly maintained iron armour charges down a narrow rocky pass in the Gerald Mountains. His warcry echoes off the snowy peaks, a guttural, blood-curdling promise of immediate dismemberment. He brings a massive steel greataxe high overhead, muscles bulging under his scarred green skin, spit flying from his yellowed tusks. But instead of meeting his furious charge with an explosive wall of frost and fire, the Dragonborn merely steps inside his wide guard with a dancer's grace and drags a subtly glowing, green-tinged elven dagger across the orc's exposed thigh. Instantly, the deafening warcry chokes off into a strained, breathless gargle. The orc does not explode. He does not burn to ash. He simply stops. His eyes widen in absolute, unadulterated terror as his powerful muscles lock into an unbreakable, instantaneous rigor mortis, frozen mid-stride. Momentum, however, is a profoundly cruel mistress. Unable to adjust his footing or brace for impact, the paralyzed bandit chief tips forward like a felled oak tree. His face meets the jagged gravel of the mountain pass with a sickening, heavy crunch that shatters his tusks, breaks his nose, and leaves him entirely motionless in a growing pool of his own blood. This is the horrifying majesty of the Paralyze enchantment. Looking at the core in-game reality of this power, we find that Paralyze is a top-tier weapon enchantment, inextricably tied to the Alteration school of magic. Unlike destruction magic, which relies on raw kinetic energy, or illusion magic, which manipulates the mind, this enchantment applies a duration-based effect directly upon striking a target. It entirely disables the victim's ability to move, attack, flee, or even scream for a few precious seconds. It turns Skyrim's most fearsome apex predators, be it a lunging saber cat, a rampaging snowbear, or a dual-wielding forsworn briarheart, into rigid, helpless statues. It acts as an arcane pause button for the most stressful combat encounters, and honestly, using it on a charging frost troll is probably the most satisfying, deeply petty way to cheat in a fair fight. But what is actually happening when that sickly, verdant light transfers from the edge of a blade into living flesh? To understand this, we must delve into our obscure lore for the evening and examine the deeply philosophical, almost metaphysical roots of alteration magic. According to the foundational arcane text Reality and Other Falsehoods, authored by the renowned Altmer scholar Cinder Velvin, alteration is not about applying physical force. It is about convincing the universe that its current state is completely wrong. The mage must assert a supreme, undeniable will over the rigid laws of nature. To paralyze an enemy, the Dragonborn is not injecting them with a physical alchemical toxin, like the venom of a frostbite spider or a dart-coated in canis root and swamp fungal pod. Instead, they are magically gaslighting reality. They are forcing the very fabric of Mundus to briefly, violently accept the blatant lie that the enemy's nervous system simply no longer functions. The enchanted blade strikes, and the universe politely nods and says, "Ah, yes, my mistake. This raging orc is actually a petrified plank of wood." It is an act of sheer, arrogant dominance over the natural order, reshaping the truth of existence with a mere flick of the wrist. This leads us to a darkly fascinating community debate. Fans still debate the exact neurological nature of this arcane stillness. When struck by a paralyzed weapon, is the victim's mind suspended in time along with their body, experiencing a brief, merciful blackout? Or are they trapped in a state of lucid, screaming consciousness, entirely aware of their surroundings but utterly unable to command their own limbs? The game engine's physical handling of the effect heavily implies the latter, leading to some hilariously grim physical comedy. When struck, enemies do not go limp and collapse into a heap. They freeze in the exact posture they held at the millisecond of impact. If you paralyze a sprinting bandit on a steep incline, they don't simply crumple. They tip over and roll down the hill like a heavily armoured cheese wheel. The physics engine treats them as a solid, frictionless block, bouncing off boulders and snapping their magically locked joints against pine trees all the way down the slope. It is a continuous debate of existential dread versus unadulterated slapstick comedy, a perfect encapsulation of the unique, slightly broken charm of our beloved northern province. To maximise this cruel and unusual punishment, a master enchanter knows better than to apply this green glow to a slow, heavy weapon like a warhammer or a great sword. No, Paralyze belongs on a weapon of swift, relentless, agonising strikes. A dagger, a lightweight short sword, something that can be flicked out in a fraction of a second from the shadows. Picture the Dragonborn standing over the arcane enchanter, a grand soul gem humming with the trapped frantic essence of a mammoth. They weave the soul into an ebony dagger, but they make a very specific, highly calculated adjustment. Instead of maximising the duration of the paralysis, locking the enemy down for 5 or 6 seconds, they reduce the duration to merely 1 single second. This drastically maximises the weapon's charge capacity, giving the dagger hundreds of strikes before needing a refill. Why 1 second? Because 1 second is all it takes. In combat, a 1-second paralysis is enough to instantly interrupt an enemy's heavy power attack, forcing their body into that stiff, ragdoll falling animation. By the time they hit the dirt, their face bouncing off the cobblestones, the paralysis has technically worn off, but they are still on the ground. They now have to endure the agonisingly slow, clumsy animation of standing back up, retrieving their footing and raising their weapon. And just as they finally get back on their feet, furious and bruised, the Dragonborn simply slashes them again with the dagger. Down they go, again and again. It is a lockdown mechanism so utterly frustrating, so deeply humiliating, that if the NPCs of Skyrim had controllers, they would undoubtedly throw them straight through their television screens. The true horror of this enchantment reveals itself in the darkest, most treacherous depths of Skyrim. Imagine delving into a forgotten Dwemer ruin, the air thick with the smell of rust, steam, and damp fungus. High above, clinging to the bronze pipes and stone arches, a farmer gloom lurker waits in ambush. Blind, feral, and driven by centuries of subterranean hatred, it leaps from the ceiling, poison-tipped claws extended, aiming to tear the Dragonborn's throat out. The Dragonborn doesn't panic. They simply draw their Paralyze enchanted dagger and point it upward, letting the falling creature impale itself on the blade. The alteration magic surges into the farmer's twisted spine. Mid-leap, the creature's body snaps completely rigid. Its momentum carries it past the Dragonborn, but its limbs are locked tight. It plummets 30 feet down a chasm, striking the ancient, unforgiving dwarven metal floor below. Because its knees cannot bend to absorb the shock, the impact shatters its femurs and drives its own ribcage into its lungs. It is a spectacular, gruesome end, achieved not with overpowering force, but with a simple denial of movement. But as amusing as it is to turn your foes into rigid bowling pins, combat in Skyrim is rarely a one-on-one affair. When the Draugr are swarming from their crypts, and the biting cold of the north is sapping the very warmth from your veins, crowd control alone won't keep you alive. Sometimes you don't just need to stop your enemy. Sometimes you need to tear the very life essence from their flesh to sustain your own. While freezing your foes solid with Stalhrim, or locking their joints into a petrified state with alteration magic, provides an undeniable tactical advantage. The harsh reality of exploring Skyrim is a game of grim attrition. No matter how perfectly you control the battlefield, eventually someone is going to land a lucky hit. You slip on a patch of black ice, or a Draugr Deathlord manages to loose an ebony arrow before you can close the distance. Suddenly that heavy iron bolt is buried deep in your shoulder, tearing through leather and muscle, and the creeping, freezing dread of blood loss begins to set in. Picture the Dragonborn deep within the oppressive, suffocating bowels of a forgotten Nordic tomb, like Folgunther or Volunrud. The air is thick with the choking stench of ancient dust, embalming fluids, and the sweet, sickly aroma of rot that has sat undisturbed for thousands of years. The Dragonborn leans heavily against a frost-rimmed stone pillar, clutching their bleeding side. Their supply of store-bought healing potions ran out 3 chambers ago, and the homemade poultices they brewed out of blue mountain flowers and butterfly wings taste distressingly like fermented skeever sweat, not to mention they barely mend a deep laceration. When the medicinal supplies dry up, and the Draugr are still clawing their way out of their sarcophagi with the relentless groaning enthusiasm of a terrible Monday morning, the adventurer must rely on a much darker, far more intimate form of survival. Enter the Absorb Health enchantment. This is not a gentle, restorative light from the divines. This is a brutal vampiric transaction, an arcane siphon that explicitly decrees, your life ends so that mine may continue. Looking at our core in-game fact for the evening, the most infamous native source of this enchantment in the game is none other than the Blade of Woe. A legendary dagger heavily steeped in blood and shadow, it is carried by Astrid, the pragmatic and deeply flawed leader of the Dark Brotherhood in Skyrim. Whether the Dragonborn earns it by pledging loyalty to the Night Mother and climbing the ranks of the shadowy assassin guild, or claims it by deciding to wipe the Dark Brotherhood off the map in a fit of righteous fury, the result is the same. The blade carries a potent Absorb Health enchantment, allowing its wielder to siphon life force with every frantic, panicked thrust. But the nature of this life-stealing magic is quite peculiar if we step back and look at the broader tapestry of Arcane history. Let us delve into our obscure lore for the evening. If you were to ask a scholar from the Third Era, say a contemporary of the Nerevarine in Morrowind or the champion of Cyrodiil, they would confidently inform you that Absorb Health is a spell belonging to the school of mysticism, or perhaps restoration, depending on the specific application. It was viewed as a transfer of spiritual energy, a manipulation of the soul's natural vitality. However, with the dissolution of the mysticism school by the Fourth Era, the College of Winterhold and the magical authorities of Skyrim definitively reclassified Absorb Health as destruction magic. The modern grim understanding is that you are no longer peacefully redistributing spiritual energy. You are violently tearing apart the target's physical matter and aggressively hijacking their cellular regeneration to stitch your own flesh back together. The sheer visceral reality of this process is as terrifying as it is magnificent. Imagine the Dragonborn gripping a beautifully crafted, jagged Daedric sword that pulses with a sickly, crimson aura. A bandit marauder lunges forward with a rusted iron mace. The Dragonborn doesn't bother blocking. They take the hit, feeling ribs crack under the blunt force, but simultaneously drive their red glowing blades straight through the marauder's leather cuirass and deep into his sternum. The destruction magic triggers instantly. A visible swirling vortex of vital ruby-red energy violently tears itself from the bandit's vascular system, spiraling up the dark metal of the blade and flooding directly into the Dragonborn's arm. You can almost hear the wet, tearing sound of it. The marauder gasps, his skin instantly turning a pale, sickly grey as his internal organs suffer massive, instantaneous necrosis. He literally withers on the blade, aging decades in a fraction of a second as his lifeblood is entirely consumed. Meanwhile, the Dragonborn experiences a rush of raw, stolen vitality. The cracked ribs snap back into place with a sickening crunch. The deep bruising fades, and the torn muscle fibres of their shoulder rapidly, violently knit themselves back together in a burst of accelerated, localized cell growth. It is an incredibly aggressive, wildly invasive form of healing. Essentially, the Dragonborn turns themselves into the world's most heavily armoured, incredibly pointy mosquito. Which brings us to a rather fascinating, long-standing community debate. Fans have endlessly argued over the exact biological mechanics of Absorb Health, specifically because of who you can use it on. If the magic relies on tearing blood and cellular vitality from a victim, how in the names of the 8 divines does it work on a Draugr? The Dragonborn will routinely stab a mummified corpse that has been desiccated and locked in a tomb for 4,000 years, a creature that is literally composed of dry bone, dust and leathery beef jerky skin, and somehow siphon health from it. Even more baffling, what happens when you strike a Dwemer Centurion? Fans debate whether the enchantment is actually absorbing literal blood, or if it is instead a universal siphon of animating kinetic energy, stripping the necromantic magicka that powers the undead, or the tonal steam-driven resonance that powers dwarven automatons, and converting that foreign energy back into biological healing for the wielder. The fact that the Dragonborn can heal a punctured lung by repeatedly stabbing a bronze robot is a testament to the wildly adaptable, undeniably absurd power of Skyrim's enchanting system. To properly utilise this vampiric sustain, a seasoned enchanter knows to pair it with speed and aggression. While the Paralyze enchantment shines on a dagger for quick crowd control, Absorb Health is the absolute king of dual-wielding close-quarters butchery. Imagine an orc berserker spinning through a crowd of Faelmer with 2 axes, both glowing with that hungry red aura. They don't need a shield, they don't need to block. Every time they take a hit, their next swinging flurry instantly refills their health pool. The combat loop shifts from a cautious, tactical dance of parries and dodges into an endless, bloody meat grinder. As long as there is flesh to bite into, the Dragonborn simply cannot die. They become a self-sustaining engine of carnage, their survival completely dependent on their ability to cause relentless, unyielding harm. But all of this power, all of this glorious, life-stealing violence, comes with a heavy logistical cost. An enchantment of this magnitude is incredibly greedy. Every strike that rips the life from a bandit drains the magical charge stored within the weapon itself. The soul gem embedded in the hilt flickers, dims, and eventually burns out completely, leaving you with nothing but a regular, albeit very sharp, piece of metal. You can't exactly swing by the local Belethor's general goods mid-dungeon to pick up a fresh pack of AA soul gems. To keep this engine of immortality running, the Dragonborn must become a harvester of souls. They must constantly actively rip the very spiritual essence from their victims just to keep their weapons fueled. And while carrying a dedicated spell for soul trapping is certainly an option, wouldn't it be far more efficient, far more ruthlessly practical, to wrap that utility directly into the weapon itself? Furthermore, why settle for simply trapping a soul when you can simultaneously set the victim completely on fire? The relentless, bloody engine of Absorb Health and the paralysing grip of Alteration Magic share one fatal flaw. They are incredibly hungry. The luminescent charge stored within the pommel of an enchanted weapon is not infinite. Every time the Dragonborn siphons the life from a bandit or freezes a charging troll into rigid meat, that magical battery drains just a little bit more. and when the glow finally fades, leaving behind nothing but cold, mundane steel, the adventurer is suddenly faced with a very grim reality. To keep these miraculous tools functioning, one must become a full-time harvester of souls. Now, casting a standard soul trap spell from the Conjuration School is certainly an option. You wave your left hand, cast a purplish ethereal net over your target, and then scramble to hack them to pieces with your right hand before the 60-second timer expires. But frankly, that is tedious. It interrupts the flow of combat. A true master of the arcane understands that efficiency is key, and the most efficient way to condemn an enemy to a crystalline prison is to forge a weapon that simply does it automatically upon impact. But why settle for just trapping a soul when you can inflict agonizing, flesh-melting trauma at the exact same time? To find this perfect synergy, the Dragonborn must make a pilgrimage high into the freezing, wind-scoured peaks nestled between Dawnstar and Winterhold. Here, partially buried in the relentless snow, lies Ironbind Barrow. The entrance is guarded by a heavy iron door, and typically a pair of rather ambitious treasure hunters, a Redguard warrior named Salma and an Argonian mage named Beamjar. We journey into the frost-choked depths alongside them, cutting through frostbite spiders and restless Draugr until we reach the final burial chamber. After defeating the hulking undead warlord Gathric, Beamjar predictably turns his magic upon the Dragonborn, intending to use their soul as a blood sacrifice. It is a completely shocking, unforeseen betrayal, assuming you've never in your life encountered a shifty, whispering necromancer loitering conspicuously outside a forgotten crypt. Once the treacherous Argonian is dispatched, we find our core in-game fact for the evening resting quietly behind Gathric's throne. It is a unique weapon known as the Steel Battle-Axe of Fiery Souls. At first glance it looks unremarkable, just a heavy, cold piece of iron and steel. But glowing within its runic etchings is the only dual utility enchantment found naturally in the entire province of Skyrim. The Dragonborn hauls this heavy prize back to an arcane enchanter, placing the axe on the glowing altar. With a surge of raw magicka, the weapon is shattered, its physical form dissolving into ash as the unique arcane blueprint is absorbed directly into the Dragonborn's mind. They have just learned Fiery Soul Trap. This enchantment is an absolute marvel of magical engineering. When applied to a weapon, it delivers exactly what it promises, a flat 10 points of fire damage, completely independent of the user's destruction skill, alongside the standard Soul Trap effect. But the true genius of this enchantment lies in the math of the Arcane Forge. If the Dragonborn scales the duration of the Soul Trap down to a mere 1 second, the same brutal efficiency we discussed with the Paralyze enchantment, they are granted an absolutely massive pool of weapon charges. The fire damage, however, remains static at 10 points. Because the Soul Trap effect triggers at the exact microsecond of the weapon's impact, a 1 second window is entirely sufficient. If the strike lands the killing blow, the soul is instantly vacuumed into the nearest empty gem in the Dragonborn's inventory. By combining these two effects, the enchanter frees up a secondary enchantment slot on the weapon, essentially turning the Tamrielic equivalent of a rechargeable AA battery into a horrific engine of eternal torment, while simultaneously giving their enemy third-degree burns. But what actually happens to the soul once it is forcefully evicted from its mortal shell and crammed into a polished rock? To understand the grim reality of this process, we must look to our obscure lore for the evening, specifically the ancient history of the Mages Guild. The concept of trapping souls was standardized centuries ago by Archmage Vanus Galerion. Galerion was deeply, profoundly opposed to necromancy. To regulate the enchanting industry and prevent mages from using the souls of men and mere, he institutionalized the classification of souls into white and black. White souls, those of animals, beasts and lesser Daedra, were deemed ethically safe to consume for enchanting. Galerion deliberately designed the sanctioned soul trap spells and standard soul gems to rigidly reject the higher, sentient black souls of humans, elves and beast folk. It was a magical failsafe meant to protect the sanctity of mortal life. However, magical failsafes are simply locks waiting for a more clever thief. Rogue necromancers, often heavily guided by the Daedric Prince Molag Bal, discovered ways to corrupt standard soul gems, creating black soul gems. These dark, sickly purple crystals bypass Galerian's ancient wards entirely. When the Dragonborn strikes a bandit with a weapon enchanted with fiery soul trap, while carrying an empty Black Soul gem, they are not just killing an enemy, they are actively subverting centuries of magical lore and committing one of the most profound spiritual atrocities known to Mundus. Which brings us to a haunting, endlessly debated topic within the community. Fans still debate the exact cosmic destination of souls trapped within these corrupted black gems. In the Dawnguard expansion, the Dragonborn physically travels to the Soul Cairn, a bleak, purplish realm of Oblivion ruled by mysterious entities known as the Ideal Masters. We learn that necromancers frequently trade souls to the Ideal Masters in exchange for power, but the terrifying fan theory posits that every single soul, trapped in a Black Soul gem, regardless of who trapped it or why, is automatically forwarded to the Soul Cairn the moment the gem is consumed at an enchanting table. If this theory holds true, the implications are absolutely staggering. It means the Dragonborn, in their quest to keep their magical swords glowing and their armour fortified, is single-handedly responsible for damning thousands of bandits, forsworn and rogue mages to an eternity of wandering a barren wasteland, weeping and stripped of all hope. Imagine the visceral reality of being on the receiving end of this weapon. A proud, defiant Stormcloak soldier charges across a snowy battlefield, screaming a war cry to Talos, fully expecting to die in glorious combat and wake up feasting in the golden halls of Sovngarde. Instead, the Dragonborn's blade connects. Instantly, the fiery soul trap triggers. A surge of searing, magical fire flash boils the moisture in the soldier's armour, roasting his flesh while a violent violet vortex simultaneously latches onto his very spiritual essence. As his physical body turns to a smoking cinder, his ethereal self is violently ripped from the mortal plane. But he doesn't see the mead halls of Sovngarde. He feels a terrifying compressive pull as he is jammed into a tiny cold crystal, sitting in a rucksack next to 3 wheels of stale cheese and a handful of mountain flowers. And the supreme indignity comes later, when the gem is finally used. It is an incredibly petty fate, dreaming of eternal glory alongside ancient heroes, only to realise your eternal afterlife is now dedicated exclusively to powering the muffled leather boots the Dragonborn wears to sneak into rich people's cellars. This is the cold, calculated cruelty of the fiery soul trap. It is not just about doing extra damage, it is about absolute, unyielding convenience at the cost of your enemy's eternal salvation. It keeps the blades hungry, the charges full, and the enemies perpetually terrified. Yet, as efficiently as this feeds our weapons, swinging a sword still requires physical effort. It requires stamina, proximity, and exposing oneself to the muddy, chaotic fray of melee combat. But what if the Dragonborn didn't have to swing a blade at all? What if they could stand atop a mountain, hands crackling with raw, unbridled elemental fury, and cast the most devastating, cataclysmic spells known to creation without ever draining a single drop of their own magicka? What if, instead of managing their resources, they simply decided to rewrite the rules of magic entirely? The messy, bloody business of swinging a weapon, even one that conveniently steals the life force and eternal souls of your enemies, is ultimately a mortal endeavour. It requires physical exertion. It demands that you close the distance, smell the rotting breath of a Draugr Deathlord, and feel the jarring, bone-rattling vibration of steel clashing against ancient iron. But for some adventurers, dirtying their boots in the mud and viscera of close-quarters melee is terribly uncivilized. Why stoop to the level of a common bandit when you can elevate yourself to a walking, unbothered natural disaster? What if you could stand safely atop a craggy overlook, hands glowing with raw, apocalyptic energy, and simply erase your problems from the landscape without ever breaking a sweat? Welcome to the intoxicating, reality-breaking zenith of arcane mastery. Welcome to the Fortify Destruction enchantment. To understand the sheer absurdity of this power, we must first look at the inherent limitations of standard spellcasting. Magic in Skyrim is exhausting. Casting a rudimentary fireball drains a noticeable portion of a mage's internal magicka reservoir, leaving them momentarily fatigued. Attempting to cast a master-level destruction spell, like summoning a localized roaring firestorm, or channeling a continuous blinding beam of plasma with lightning storm, requires an agonizingly long charge-up time and entirely empties the magicka pool of all but the most dedicated scholars. You get one, perhaps two, cataclysmic bursts, and then you are left standing there, entirely depleted, frantically chucking glowing blue potions while a very angry singed bear charges toward you. But our core in-game fact for the evening subverts this biological limitation entirely. Through the careful application of Grand Soul gems, the Dragonborn can enchant 4 specific pieces of apparel with Fortify Destruction: a helmet or circlet, a chest piece, a ring, and a necklace. If the enchanter's skill is sufficiently mastered, each of these 4 items can reduce the magicka cost of destruction spells by exactly 25%. When you wear all 4 pieces simultaneously, the mathematics of the creation engine stack additively, not multiplicatively. 4 times 25 equals 100. The magicka cost of every single destruction spell, from a tiny spark to a hurricane of pure, unadulterated elemental fury, becomes exactly 0. The immediate result is nothing short of hilarious. You can effectively bypass the entire prestigious, decades-long curriculum of the College of Winterhold just by putting on 4 pieces of aggressively bedazzled jewellery. Elderly wizards spend their entire lives hunched over dusty tomes, cultivating their magicka reserves, suffering from magical exhaustion and arcane migraines, only to be entirely upstaged by a Dragonborn who glued a shiny rock to a silver necklace in the basement of Breezehome and suddenly possesses infinite cosmic power. But what is actually happening on a metaphysical level when the Dragonborn achieves this state of zero-cost casting? To understand this, we must gaze upward, beyond the freezing clouds of Skyrim, and delve into our obscure lore for the evening. We need to talk about where magicka actually comes from. In the Elder Scrolls universe, magicka is not an internal biological byproduct. It is a radiant cosmic radiation leaking into reality. When the architect deity Magnus realized the mortal realm of Mundus was a flawed, agonizing trap, he fled back to the immortal realm of Aetherius. His violent departure tore a massive gaping hole in the very fabric of Oblivion. This hole is what mortals perceive as the sun. The lesser spirits who followed him, the Magnurge, tore smaller holes as they fled, which mortals perceive as the stars. Magicka is literal starlight, the raw, unfiltered energy of Aetherius bleeding through these cosmic perforations and washing over Nirn. Normally, a mortal mage acts as a flesh and blood funnel for this radiant energy. They draw the ambient starlight into their bodies, process it through their nervous system, and project it outward. This process is highly volatile and physically taxing. But when you equip 4 perfectly crafted Fortify Destruction enchantments, you are fundamentally altering this biological process. You're creating an artificial, frictionless conduit. The enchanted armour acts as the ultimate unmetered utility hookup. You're essentially sticking a cosmic fork directly into the socket of Aetherius. The starlight no longer filters through your mortal stamina or mental fortitude. The enchantments draw the raw, infinite power of the sun directly from the sky, instantly converting it into elemental destruction at your fingertips, completely bypassing your body's limitations. You become an open valve in the universe's plumbing, pouring infinite energy into the world without suffering an ounce of strain. This leads to a fascinating, fiercely debated topic within the community. Fans endlessly debate whether this 100% cost reduction is merely a mechanical oversight by Bethesda, a failure to implement a hard cap at, say, 90%, as they did with physical armour resistance, or if it is actually a lore-accurate representation of demigod-level mastery. Those arguing for the lore perspective point to legendary figures from Tamriel's past. Devaith Fear, the ancient Telvanni sorcerer of Morrowind, or Shalador, the legendary Nord archmage who built the Labyrinth of Labyrinthian, were known to perform magical feats that defied all conventional understanding of magicka reserves. Shalador supposedly built the city of Winterhold with a whispered spell. Did these ancient masters also discover the secret to perfectly frictionless arcane conduits? Is the zero-cost Dragonborn simply achieving a state of canonical, reality-bending enlightenment, brushing up against the edges of CHIM by asserting absolute dominance over the laws of thermodynamics? Whether it is a divine feature or a beautifully broken engine quirk, the gameplay reality remains intoxicatingly godlike. Let us paint a vivid picture of this power in action. Imagine a heavily fortified bandit encampment deep within the pine forests of Falkreath. A dozen seasoned cutthroats, clad in heavy furs and stolen steel, sit around a roaring campfire, boasting of their recent raids. The night is quiet, save for the crackle of burning logs and the distant hoot of an owl. Suddenly a figure emerges from the tree line. The Dragonborn doesn't bother sneaking, they don't draw a sword, they simply raise both hands. The air instantly grows heavy, the sharp, metallic tang of ozone pressing thickly against the back of the throat. The hairs on the arms of the bandit stand on end, as the ambient static electricity in the camp spikes off the charts. The Dragonborn unleashes Lightning Storm. Because there is no magicka cost, there is no need to aim carefully or conserve energy. A continuous, blindingly bright beam of highly concentrated plasma erupts from their fingertips. The roar of the electricity is deafening, a continuous thunderclap that rattles the pine needles from the trees. The beam sweeps casually across the camp. When it connects with the bandit chief mid-monologue, he doesn't just die. The water inside his body instantaneously superheats into steam, causing his heavy iron armour to burst open like a ruptured boiler. His flesh is vaporized in a millisecond, leaving behind nothing but a faintly glowing pile of ash drifting gently into the dirt. The Dragonborn holds the beam, sweeping it left and right like a highly lethal, impossibly loud flashlight, effortlessly melting barricades, incinerating archers in their watchtowers, and boiling the blood of the camp's guard dogs before they can even bark. It is a display of overwhelming, effortless annihilation. The Dragonborn is not fighting, they are performing aggressive landscaping. Or consider the visceral horror of the firestorm spell when cost is no longer a limiting factor. Surrounded by a horde of Draugr in a cramped crypt, the Dragonborn simply crosses their arms and continuously detonates thermonuclear shockwaves of pure flame centered on their own body. The ancient, mummified flesh of the undead doesn't stand a chance. The crypt becomes a blinding white furnace, the heat so intense that the stone walls begin to crack and weep molten slag. The Dragonborn stands in the epicenter, perfectly untouched, casting explosion after explosion with the bored, glassy-eyed expression of a farmer pulling weeds. This is the luxury of Fortify destruction. It transforms the tense tactical struggle for survival into a serene god-mode power trip. You no longer manage resources, you merely decide what flavour of cosmic wrath you wish to paint the landscape with today. Will it be a blizzard that freezes the blood in a giant's veins, or a relentless barrage of incinerate spells that turn a charging saber-cat into a charred skeleton before its paws touch the ground? Yet, for all this phenomenal, earth-shattering cosmic power, the enchantments are bound to physical objects. They require a canvas, a helmet to wear, a ring to slip onto a finger, a cuirass to strap across the chest. And while one could certainly slap these reality-bending runes onto a basic set of iron armour looted from a dead guard, a true perfectionist knows that the vessel must be worthy of the magic it holds. If you have the knowledge to bend the very starlight of Aetherius to your whim, why wouldn't you apply that same obsessive, godlike manipulation to the very steel you wear? Why stop at breaking the rules of magic when you can also rewrite the fundamental laws of metallurgy? The transition from a mere mortal wielding arcane trinkets to a walking invulnerable god begins not at an enchanting altar, but in the suffocating, sulphurous heat of the forge. If the Dragonborn has already learned to hijack the radiant starlight of Aetherius to cast zero-cost destruction magic, it stands to reason they would not be caught dead wearing a standard, mass-produced set of steel plate purchased from Adriana Avenici. No, a true master demands bespoke perfection. They demand metallurgy that fundamentally disrespects the natural laws of physics. Welcome to the blistering, rhythmic majesty of the Fortify smithing enchantment. Imagine the Dragonborn approaching an anvil. But before they even pick up a hammer, they undergo a rather bizarre wardrobe change. They strip off their terrifying, blood-soaked battle armour and slip into a highly specific, aggressively enchanted ensemble. Our core in-game fact for the evening dictates that Fortify smithing can only be applied to 4 distinct items of apparel: a chest piece, a pair of gauntlets, a ring, and a necklace. The aesthetic is often hilariously underwhelming. Picture the legendary slayer of Alduin, the saviour of the northern province, preparing to forge weapons of mythic devastation while wearing a simple blacksmith's apron, coarse leather gloves, and 2 pieces of dazzling glowing jewellery that look like they were stolen from a wealthy dowager in solitude. But this ridiculous outfit is a conduit for profound physical manipulation. Unlike Fortify destruction, which channels cosmic energy into volatile spells, Fortify smithing channels that energy directly into the Dragonborn's kinetic precision and understanding of material stress. It dramatically amplifies the effectiveness of every hammer strike at the anvil, every pass of the whetstone, and every rivet secured at the workbench. To fully appreciate the gravity of this crafting process, we must take our enchanted apron to the most revered crucible in all of Skyrim, the Skyforge. Perched high above the city of Whiterun, this massive bird-like stone monument offers a commanding view of the tundra, but its true significance lies deep in our obscure lore for the evening. According to Yorland Greymane, the gruff stoic master smith who tends its eternal flames, the Skyforge is not a Nordic construction. It is older than Whiterun. It is older than the companions who built their mead hall, Jorvaska, beside it. In fact, ancient texts suggest the Skyforge predates the arrival of the elves in Skyrim. The ancient Atmorans found the forge already burning, a primal anomaly carved into the very bedrock of the world. The elves of the Merethic era actively avoided it, believing it to be a relic of Lorcan, the trickster god, and claiming that the stone itself radiated a terrifying divine heat that felt alive. Yorland notes that the Skyforge brings dead metal to life. The fire does not merely melt steel or ebony, it tempers it with ancient primordial magic, aligning the microscopic crystalline structure of the metal in ways standard charcoal fires simply cannot achieve. Now, imagine the Dragonborn stepping up to this ancient sacred fire wearing 4 pieces of gear heavily enchanted with Fortify smithing. They are stacking a mathematically broken magical amplification on top of an already mythic reality-warping forge. The sensory experience is intoxicating. The Dragonborn draws a glowing white-hot ingot of ebony from the coals with a pair of heavy iron tongs. They place it upon the massive stone anvil. As they raise their hammer, the enchantments flare. The Dragonborn's muscles do not just strike the metal, they read it. They feel the exact molecular imperfections in the ore. The rhythmic, deafening clang, clang, clang echoes across the Wind District, a steady, hypnotic pulse of creation. Under the influence of the enchantments, the Dragonborn is not merely folding the ebony, they are bullying it. They are compressing the mass of the armour to a frankly absurd density, hammering out impurities that shouldn't even be visible to the mortal eye. When they take this impossibly dense, perfectly forged cuirass to the workbench to improve it, the armour rating skyrockets. It blows past flawless. It eclipses epic. It reaches legendary. And then it just keeps climbing. This brings us to a wildly entertaining, deeply analytical community debate. Fans have spent years dissecting the game engine's physical armour cap. In Skyrim, physical damage reduction is hard capped at exactly 80%. You achieve this 80% reduction when your displayed armour rating reaches 567. However, with highly enchanted Fortify smithing gear, the Dragonborn can easily forge a set of Daedric or Dragonbone armour, with an armour rating of 2,000, 3,000 or even 5,000. The debate centres on this overflow armour. Since the game mechanics physically stop calculating damage reduction at 567, what does an armour rating of 5,000 actually represent in the physical world of Tamriel? Some fans theorise that pushing armour that far beyond the mathematical limits of the universe causes a localised kinetic reflection field. The metal becomes so impossibly dense, so utterly frictionless and perfect, that it defies standard Newtonian physics. It is the metallurgical equivalent of achieving CHIM. The armour realises it is a video game object and simply refuses to participate in taking damage. Let us visualise the horrific, bone-shattering comedy of this theory in practice. The Dragonborn, clad in this freshly forged, mathematically impossible Daedric armour, is walking down a moonlit road near Riften. A desperate, skooma-addled thief leaps from the bushes wielding a jagged iron dagger. The thief thrusts the dagger with all his might directly at the Dragonborn's chestplate. If this were normal armour, the dagger might glance off, perhaps scratching the paint or jarring the wearer. But this armour has a rating of 4,000. When the iron tip connects with the impossibly dense Daedric plating, it doesn't just stop. The absolute unyielding density of the cuirass instantly rejects the kinetic energy of the strike, sending 100% of the force violently back up the dagger. In a fraction of a millisecond, the iron dagger simply disintegrates, shattering into metallic dust out of pure structural embarrassment. The kinetic feedback instantly snaps the thief's wrist, travels up his forearm, fractures his radius and ulna into a dozen pieces, and violently dislocates his shoulder. The thief collapses, screaming in agony, clutching a floppy, ruined arm, while the Dragonborn hasn't even broken their stride, entirely unbothered by the fact that someone just tried to assassinate them. Even Skyrim's apex predators are completely humiliated by this level of craftsmanship. Imagine a legendary ancient dragon, a massive, scaly beast whose jaws are designed to snap the spines of mammoths, swooping down to bite the Dragonborn. The dragon clamps its massive jaws down on the Dragonborn's heavily fortified ebony pauldron. Instead of crushing bone, there is a horrific, sickening crack that echoes across the tundra. The dragon recoils, whimpering, having just shattered 3 of its own ancient razor-sharp teeth on a shoulder guard that was forged by a very angry Nord wearing a sparkly necklace. It is an incredibly empowering, deeply satisfying plateau of physical safety. You become a walking, impenetrable fortress. Arrows bounce off your visor like dry pine needles. The heavy, concussive swings of a giant's club, which would normally launch a lesser adventurer directly into the stratosphere, merely push you back a few inches, leaving thick, muddy trenches where your boots refuse to yield. Yet for all this impenetrable glory, a restless, ambitious mind always asks, can we go further? The enchantments alone allow the Dragonborn to forge demigod tier armor, yes, but what if the enchantments themselves could be enhanced? What if the 4 pieces of Fortify smithing gear were somehow boosted by an external, temporary catalyst before the hammer ever struck the anvil? If enchanting relies on soul gems and magical theory, and smithing relies on heat and hammer, there remains a third, highly volatile pillar of crafting in Skyrim. A pillar composed of toxic roots, crushed insect wings and bubbling neon-coloured sludge. To truly break the fabric of the universe, to create weapons that deal millions of points of damage and armour that could withstand the collapse of a dying star, the Dragonborn must step away from the glowing anvil and turn their attention to the alchemist's mortar and pestle. The echoing clangs of the Skyforge and the blinding heat of the coals fade away, replaced by a much softer, wetter sound. A rhythmic, grinding squelch echoes through the dimly lit, poorly ventilated basement of Breezehome. The Dragonborn sits hunched over a heavy stone mortar and pestle, surrounded by a horrifying menagerie of severed monster parts, dried fungus, and glowing weeds. The air is thick and cloying, smelling violently of sulphur, crushed blisterwort, and the distinct toe jam musk of a giant's severed digit. The forge allowed us to bend steel to our will, but to truly break the fabric of the universe, we must engage in a much darker, far more toxic science. Welcome to the sickening, miraculous art of the Fortify Alchemy enchantment. Our core in-game fact for the evening dictates the parameters of this arcane laboratory. Much like smithing, the Fortify Alchemy enchantment can only be bound to 4 specific pieces of apparel: a helmet, a pair of gauntlets, a necklace, and a ring. When adorned in this heavily enchanted alchemist's garb, the Dragonborn's ability to extract and synthesize the hidden properties of organic matter is drastically magnified. A standard health potion brewed by an amateur might mend a scraped knee. A potion brewed by a master wearing this gear could seamlessly reattach a severed limb while simultaneously curing a hangover. But true alchemical mastery is not merely a matter of following recipes. It is a profound manipulation of reality at its most fundamental level. To understand what the Dragonborn is actually doing when they mash up a handful of snowberries and the wings of a blue butterfly, we must look to our obscure lore for the evening, specifically the ancient text De Rerum Direnis. Penned by the legendary Altmer scholar Asliel Direni, often considered the father of modern alchemy, this text reveals that alchemy is not merely mundane chemistry. It is not just about acids and bases reacting in a flask. In the Elder Scrolls universe, the laws of physics and nature are maintained by the Earthbones, the ancient El Nofi spirits who sacrifice themselves to stabilize the mortal plane of Mundus. Direni postulated that every plant, every creature, and every mineral contains a trapped microscopic fragment of these divine spirits. Therefore, when an alchemist grinds reagents together and binds them with magicka, they are not just making a toxic soup, they are temporarily dissolving and recombining the Earthbones. They are creating a localized, ingestible potion of altered reality, which brings us to the most infamous, reality-shattering exploit in the history of Tamriel, the feedback loop. A logical alchemist would use their Fortify Alchemy gear to brew a potion of Fortify Enchanting. They would then drink that potion, walk over to the Arcane enchanter, and create a slightly stronger set of Fortify Alchemy gear. They would put the new gear on, brew a slightly stronger potion, and repeat the process. Under normal intended circumstances, this loop features strictly diminishing returns, eventually capping out at a reasonable, albeit very powerful plateau. The universe politely enforces its boundaries, but the Dragonborn, heavily burdened with the souls of dead dragons and a blatant disregard for cosmic law, does not accept boundaries. They bypass the intended loop entirely and plunge straight into the deeply broken mathematics of the Fortify Restoration exploit. To perform this, the Dragonborn does not seek out rare, mythic ingredients. They go to the Riften docks and fish. They gather an absurd quantity of the most mundane, unglamorous ingredients imaginable: Abyssian longfin, Cyrodiilic spade tail, and basic piles of salt. These ingredients, when combined, create a potion of Fortify Restoration. Herein lies the catastrophic engine quirk that defines this community debate. In the game's underlying code, the enchantments you wear on your clothing, including Fortify Alchemy, are technically classified by the engine as active restoration magic buffs. They are treated as spells cast upon your own body. Therefore, when you drink a potion of Fortify Restoration, it does not just make your healing spells stronger, it multiplicatively amplifies the enchantments on the clothes you are currently wearing. Fans have debated for over a decade whether this interaction is simply a hilarious overlooked integer overflow glitch, or if it represents something far more profound within the lore. Some hardcore lore enthusiasts argue that the Dragonborn is accidentally achieving a localized form of CHIM, the esoteric state of enlightenment where a mortal realizes they are existing within a dream, yet maintains their individuality to manipulate the dream source code. By continuously drinking a toxic slurry of salted fish water, the Dragonborn's consciousness expands so violently that they literally perceive the mathematical variables of the universe and simply rewrite them. Let us visualize the horrific, profoundly undignified reality of executing this loop. The Dragonborn stands in their basement, wearing their enchanted apron and jewelry. They crush a handful of raw, scaly Abyssian longfin and a fistful of coarse rock salt into a vial, creating a thick, briny, foul-smelling sludge. They drink it. It tastes like a decaying shipwreck. Instantly, the Fortify Alchemy enchantments on their aprons spike in power by 50%. While the potion's effect is active, the Dragonborn frantically brews another identical potion. Because their gear is now magically hypercharged, this second potion is vastly stronger. They pull off their apron, ring, and necklace, resetting the engine's physical calculation, and then immediately put them back on. They drink the second potion. Their liver lets out a silent, microscopic scream of absolute terror as it is forced to metabolize pure, unadulterated cosmic error. The enchantments on their gear instantly amplify by 500%. They repeat the process. They brew, they strip, they dress, they drink. With every iteration, the numbers do not just climb, they violently skyrocket. By the fifth potion, the Dragonborn is sweating profusely, their veins glowing a faint, sickly white beneath their skin. By the 10th potion, the air in the basement begins to warp and shimmer, the ambient gravity heavily distorting around the mortar and pestle. By the 15th iteration, the Dragonborn holds a potion of Fortify Restoration that boasts an effectiveness of 4,800,000%. The physical toll of consuming this final draft is viscerally apocalyptic. When the Dragonborn tilts the glass vial back, the liquid doesn't just flow, it drags itself down their throat like liquid lead. The instant it hits their stomach, their vascular system turns into a network of white-hot, electrified wires. Their irises vibrate wildly, the pupils dilating until their eyes are completely black. They experience a terrifying momentary screen tear in their peripheral vision as the fabric of Mundus struggles to render their physical existence. They are no longer a biological organism, they are a walking, breathing integer overflow. Their biology is so aggressively fortified that if a vampire attempted to bite their neck, the vampire's teeth would instantly shatter, and the resulting kinetic feedback would cure the vampire's undead curse out of sheer, overwhelming biological dominance. While suspended in this agonizing, transcendent state of hyper-reality, the Dragonborn acts quickly. They switch ingredients, They toss aside the fish and the salt and instead crush a blue butterfly wing and a clump of snowberries. They brew a final, definitive potion of Fortify Enchanting. The resulting mixture is a dark, churning liquid that seems to absorb the light around it. The label, if it could be perceived by mortal eyes, would read, "For 30 seconds, items are enchanted 7,450,000% stronger." The Dragonborn sets the mortar aside, wiping a trickle of glowing neon blue blood from their nose. They pick up the vial and slowly walk out of the basement, their footsteps leaving faint, scorching imprints on the wooden floorboards. They are heading toward the Arcane Enchanter. They hold in their hand the liquid equivalent of a nuclear warhead, an alchemical skeleton key capable of creating gear that fundamentally breaks the game. They could enchant a wooden sword to instantly delete a legendary dragon from the space-time continuum. They could forge boots that increase their stamina to such a degree that they could sprint continuously from Solitude to Riften without ever taking a breath. The possibilities are as endless as they are terrifying, but raw damage and infinite stamina are hollow. Victories if the Dragonborn is incinerated by a stray fireball before they can draw their weapon. Before we unleash this ungodly, chemically induced power upon the offensive arts, a true survivor knows that the first priority must always be absolute, impenetrable defense. Having transcended physical metallurgy and broken the alchemy system entirely, it is time to turn our attention to the volatile, searing breath of the dragons and the bone-chilling frost of the necromancers. It is time to render the very concept of hostile magic entirely obsolete. The Dragonborn stands before the Arcane Enchanter, the cosmic world-breaking potion of Fortify Enchanting sloshing violently in their stomach. They have exactly 30 seconds before the hyper-metabolized effects wear off, and their liver finally files a formal complaint to the divines. With frantic, jittery precision, they slam a flawless diamond ring onto the glowing altar, followed immediately by a Grand Soul gem pulsing with the terrified essence of a mammoth. They weave the runic threads of the resist magic enchantment into the gold, their fingers moving in a blur. The altar shrieks, a high-pitched, tearing sound of raw magicka being compressed into a space far too small to hold it. When the light fades, the Dragonborn holds a ring that, mathematically speaking, should render them completely impervious to the wrath of the gods. The deeply broken alchemical loop has resulted in a tooltip that confidently declares, increases magic resistance by 14,500%. But here, finally, the universe decides to push back. Here, the fundamental laws of Mundus aggressively enforce a boundary that no amount of salted fishwater can overcome. Our core in-game fact for the evening revolves around a hard-coded limitation within the very fabric of Skyrim's reality. Unlike Fortify Smithing, which can scale to infinite, game-crashing levels of physical defense, or Fortify Destruction, which smoothly bottoms out at zero cost, resist magic hits a brick wall. The game engine places a strict, undeniable hard cap on magical resistance at exactly 85%. You can wear a ring that claims to block 14,000% of incoming magic, but the engine calmly steps in, crosses its arms and says, "No, 85, take it or leave it." You cannot achieve total 100% immunity through this enchantment alone. This means that no matter how powerful your enchanting loop becomes, 15% of every fireball, every frost spike, and every crackling bolt of lightning is going to slip through the cracks. It is a wonderfully petty piece of cosmic revenge. You have broken the universe, but the universe is still going to ensure your eyebrows get singed and your favourite fur cloak perpetually smells like a campfire. But what exactly is the Dragonborn doing when they slip this ring onto their finger? How does a simple band of gold deflect the raw, unfettered starlight of Aetherius? To understand this, we must dig deep into our obscure lore for the evening and look westward, past the Gerald Mountains to the misty peaks of High Rock. The true masters of innate magic resistance are the Bretons. During the First Era, the Elven Dureni hegemony ruled over High Rock, subjugating the local human Nedic populations. Over centuries of highly uncomfortable, aggressively hierarchical intermingling, a new race emerged, the Manmeri, or Bretons. According to ancient Altmeri scholars analysing this genetic offshoot, the merging of elven magical attunement with Nedic physical resilience created a biological anomaly. The very cellular structure of a Breton acts as an arcane Faraday cage. When raw magicka strikes them, their flesh natively grounds the energy, dispersing it harmlessly into the earth before it can violently react with their internal organs. When the Dragonborn enchants a piece of jewellery with resist magic, they are not creating a physical shield. They are essentially using a trapped soul to cast an artificial, localised projection of Breton biology over their own skin. The enchantment synthesises a microscopic, invisible layer of man-made dermal tissue that aggressively grounds incoming spells. It is an incredibly effective defence mechanism, even if the underlying concept of wearing a synthetic suit of invisible Breton skin is profoundly unsettling. This interaction leads us to one of the most hotly contested, endlessly debated topics within the community's lore-focused circles. Fans passionately argue over the physics of destruction magic and how, exactly, this 85% resistance is applied. The debate centres on the difference between thermal energy and kinetic force. When a master pyromancer hurls an incinerate spell, it is not merely a wave of heat, it is an exploding sphere of super-dense plasma. It possesses mass. It creates a concussive shockwave. Fans theorise that while the resist magic enchantment flawlessly grounds the magical heat, preventing the Dragonborn's blood from boiling and their flesh from turning to ash, it should do absolutely nothing to mitigate the kinetic force of the explosion. If this theory holds true, a high-level mage encounter becomes a scene of profound physical comedy. Imagine the Dragonborn, wearing their heavily enchanted ring, charging down the stone corridors of Felglow Keep. A rogue mage panics and unleashes a massive roaring fireball. The projectile strikes the Dragonborn directly in the chest. Because of the 85% resistance cap, the thermal damage is negligible. The Dragonborn doesn't burn, but the kinetic shockwave of the explosion should still, theoretically, launch them backward like a cannonball. The debate suggests the Dragonborn would be violently thrown through a wooden door, bounce off a stone wall, and land in a heap of shattered pottery, entirely unburned, mildly annoyed, and deeply bruised by the architecture rather than the magic itself. The fact that the game engine allows the Dragonborn to simply stand there, absorbing an explosion that should rattle their teeth out of their skull without flinching, is a testament to the staggering, unyielding dominance of the enchantment. Let us paint a picture of this terrifying resilience in its purest form. The Dragonborn stands at the freezing peak of Mount Anthor, the biting wind whipping their cloak into a frenzy. Circling high above, blotting out the pale northern sun, is an ancient dragon. The beast roars, a sound that vibrates in the marrow of the bone, and dives. It opens its massive scythe-like jaws and unleashes a torrent of liquid, golden fire. This is not a spell cast by a mortal. This is the Thuum. It is tonal magic, reality rewritten by the breath of a divine shard of Akatosh. It is designed to melt steel into slag and turn entire villages into glass craters. The wall of fire washes over the Dragonborn. For a moment, they are completely engulfed in a blinding, roaring inferno. A normal man would have their lungs flash fry inside their chest in a fraction of a second. The moisture in their eyes would boil away. But the Dragonborn merely leans into the flame. The resist magic enchantment flares, an invisible, localised Faraday cage working overtime. The searing heat is aggressively mitigated, grounded out through the soles of their boots and into the snowy peak, instantly melting a massive crater in the ice around them. The dragon's breath, meant to be a cataclysmic event, feels like stepping into a rather aggressive, overly dry sauna. The 15% of the damage that manages to pierce the veil is just enough to be mildly inconvenient. The Dragonborn feels a sharp, sunburn-like sting across their cheeks. Their hair whips back, the ends sizzling and curling into black crisps. They let out a slow, heavy sigh, batting a stray ember off their heavily fortified Daedric shoulder pad. The dragon lands with a thud that shakes the mountain, expecting to find a pile of smoking ash. Instead, it finds a highly irritated demigod who smells strongly of burnt hair, entirely unbothered, drawing a Stalhrim battle axe that crackles with chaotic energy. The arch-pyromancers and the ancient worms of Skyrim alike are forced into the same horrifying realization. Their ultimate world-ending power is completely irrelevant. They are throwing matches at a glacier. Yet, as glorious as it is to stand proudly in the centre of an inferno, completely unyielding, an adventurer's life is not always about drawing attention. Sometimes, the most terrifying weapon is not a sword that strikes with the fury of 1,000 storms, nor a shield that turns aside the breath of gods. Sometimes, the most profound power lies in absolute suffocating silence. If you're already immune to physical trauma and completely insulated against magical destruction, why give your enemies the courtesy of knowing you are even there? Why allow the echoing clank of your impossible, demigod-forged armour to herald your arrival? It is time to step out of the blinding light of the fireballs and retreat into the deep velvet darkness. It is time to command the shadows themselves. We have spent the evening constructing a walking apocalypse, a being of incalculable physical density, entirely immune to the searing breath of ancient worms and capable of annihilating entire bandit camps with the flick of a wrist. But a god of destruction walking the mortal plane is inherently, undeniably loud. When you're draped head to toe in heavily fortified, spike-covered Daedric metal, stealth is fundamentally impossible. Trying to sneak through a silent Nordic crypt in a suit of ebony or Daedric armour sounds exactly like throwing a large burlap sack full of iron anvils and loose cutlery down a spiral staircase. It echoes, it grinds. Every single movement announces your presence to every Draugr, Faermer and paranoid bandit within a 3-mile radius. But what if you didn't have to compromise? What if you could maintain the unyielding, mathematically broken physical defences of a tank, but move with the absolute suffocating silence of a falling shadow? We now lower our voices, dim the ambient magicka, and step quietly into the velvet darkness of the Muffle enchantment. To acquire this deeply coveted power, the Dragonborn must engage in one of the most infamously frustrating, deeply undignified mechanics in all of Skyrim. Our core in-game fact for the evening revolves around the bizarre loot pool logic of the disenchantable Boots of Muffling. Unlike specific unique artifacts like the ancient Shrouded Boots or the Nightingale Boots, which possess the Muffle effect but strictly refuse to be disenchanted upon the altar, a generic pair of muffled boots can be broken down to learn the secret. However, there is a catch. A massive, mathematically agonizing catch. The game engine assigns enchantments to merchant inventories and random loot chests based on the player's level and the base value of the enchantment. Muffle has a very low base value, therefore it only reliably spawns in merchant inventories when the player is between levels 11 and 20. Once the Dragonborn levels past this narrow window, the loot tables become flooded with more expensive higher tier enchantments, like Fortify Sneak or Fortify Carry Weight, aggressively pushing Muffle out of the random generation pool. The resulting reality is a comedic tragedy. You have a level 75 demigod, clad in armour forged from the bones of dragons, capable of shouting the sky clear, standing awkwardly in Belethor's general goods in Whiterun. They are furiously waiting on the wooden bench for 48 hours at a time, repeatedly staring the poor, exhausted Breton merchant directly in the eyes, desperately hoping he has somehow stocked a basic pair of muffled steel boots. The Slayer of Alduin is reduced to a deeply unhinged window shopper, a victim of their own overwhelming success, begging the universe for a low-level pair of shoes. But when the elusive boots are finally acquired, sacrificed upon the arcane altar, and the enchantment is learned, the application is magnificent. The Dragonborn takes their impossibly heavy, profoundly dense Daedric boots, the ones we mathematically broke at the Skyforge a few sections ago, and binds the Muffle enchantment to the dark metal. The result is an acoustic paradox. The Dragonborn puts the massive boots on. They weigh 30 pounds each. The metal is thick, jagged, and heavily layered. The Dragonborn takes a heavy, deliberate stomping step onto the stone floor of their basement. There is no clank. There is no thud. There is absolutely nothing. The boot connects with the stone, and the universe simply mutes the audio track. The silence is not peaceful. It is heavy, unnatural, and deeply unsettling. It is a thick, suffocating absence of sound that makes the ears ring, a localized void where physics has been aggressively told to be quiet. To understand what is happening here, we must look beyond the standard classifications of the College of Winterhold. The modern mages classify Muffle as an illusion spell, a mere trick of the mind. But to fully grasp the cosmic implications of erasing sound, we must delve into our obscure lore for the evening and consult the ancient esoteric teachings of Azra Nightwielder. Azra was a legendary mage from the Second Era, the pioneer of a deeply forbidden, poorly understood branch of the arcane known as shadow magic. According to Azra's texts, shadows are not merely the absence of light, they are the physical manifestation of alternate, conflicting probabilities. They are the scars left on the world where different timelines rub against one another. Azra theorized that by manipulating shadow, a mage is actually manipulating the multiverse. When the Dragonborn binds Muffle to their boots, they are heavily drawing upon this ancient shadow magic. The enchantment is not putting a literal physical cushion of sound-absorbing foam beneath the metal sole. Instead, it is wrapping the boots in an anomalous field of alternate probability. When the heavy Daedric boot strikes the stone floor, the enchantment violently shifts the kinetic, acoustic energy of that impact into an adjacent parallel reality. The sound of the footstep absolutely happens, it is deafening, but it happens to a different version of the Dragonborn in a different timeline. You're offloading your noise pollution onto the multiverse. You're walking in the shadows of steps you never mathematically took in this realm of existence. This leads directly into a wildly entertaining, deeply persistent community debate regarding the engine's classification of the magic. Because Muffle is officially categorized as an illusion effect by the game's internal logic, lore enthusiasts endlessly debate the terrifying implications of how it interacts with the world. If Muffle is truly an illusion spell, it is not manipulating physical sound waves or alternate realities. Illusion magic is telepathic. It affects the mind of the observer. Fans theorize that a muffled Dragonborn is essentially walking around broadcasting a massive, incredibly aggressive psychic Wi-Fi signal. They aren't actually silent. The heavy armor is still clanking, grinding, and echoing loudly through the dungeon. The boots are still crushing loose gravel and snapping dry bones, but the enchantment is forcefully, telepathically gaslighting everyone in a 50-foot radius. The psychic field forcibly invades the auditory processing center of every bandit, farmer, and draugr nearby, inserting a commanding, undeniable thought. You did not just hear that. That deafening metallic crash was probably just the wind. Ignore it. The visual imagery this debate conjures is nothing short of incredible. Imagine a bandit chief sitting deep within the damp, echoing chambers of Embushed Mine. He's carefully whittling a piece of pine, enjoying the quiet crackle of his campfire. Unknown to him, a 300-pound Nord wearing jagged, glowing Daedric armor is attempting to sneak up behind him. The Dragonborn accidentally kicks a metal bucket which clatters loudly against a rock wall. The Dragonborn's armor squeals and grinds with every rigid movement. It sounds like a horrific multi-car carriage pile-up. The bandit chief's ears register the deafening noise. His brain receives the signal, but before he can turn his head, the Muffle enchantment aggressively rewrites his conscious thought process. He pauses, blinks, stares blankly at the cave wall and casually mutters, "Must have been my imagination." The sheer, imposing arrogance of this telepathic domination is staggering. The Dragonborn is not a silent predator. They are an impossibly loud juggernaut forcefully commanding the universe to pretend they are a ninja. Whether the magic creates a localized vacuum of alternate probability or operates as a localized psychic lobotomy, the tactical application is a masterclass in psychological terror. Let us return to the darkness. The Dragonborn, now completely muted, stalks through the winding, frost-choked corridors of a farmer hive. The blind, twisted elves rely entirely on their hypersensitive hearing to survive in the pitch-black depths of Blackreach. Their entire societal defense mechanism is built upon the echoing acoustics of the caves. The Dragonborn walks directly into their camp. The Fulmachaurus reapers, insects the size of draft horses, click their mandibles, sensing a change in the air pressure but unable to hear a single footfall. A Falmer Shadowmaster stands near a glowing cluster of Chaurus eggs, listening intently to the dripping water. The Dragonborn simply walks up, heavy Daedric boots crushing a pile of discarded bones into fine powder. The powder puffs into the air. Absolute silence. The Dragonborn stands inches from the creature. The Falmer feels the sudden, suffocating warmth of the Dragonborn's presence. It feels the displacement of the humid air. But its ears, its primary tether to reality, feed it nothing but the terrifying, roaring void of the Muffle enchantment. The creature begins to panic, wildly swinging its poison-tipped sword at the empty air, completely incapable of passing the fact that a walking tank is standing right in front of it. It is an incredibly predatory, deeply unfair advantage. You have stripped the enemy of their fundamental senses. You have turned their own biological defenses against them, rendering their acute hearing a massive liability. But silence alone is merely the absence of sound. It prevents you from being heard. But in a world illuminated by roaring braziers, glowing fungi, and the pale light of the moons, silence does not stop you from being seen. If we have conquered the auditory spectrum, if we have mastered the art of moving a mountain without making a sound, then the next logical step in our descent into the shadows is to conquer the visual spectrum. It is time to stop hiding in the dark and begin weaponizing the light itself. It is time to learn how to disappear completely while standing in plain sight. Muting your footfalls and erasing your acoustic footprint from the physical world is a glorious achievement. It allows the Dragonborn to stalk the subterranean depths of Blackreach, or the echoing halls of a Nordic crypt with the unbothered confidence of a ghost. But as any seasoned cutpurse in the Ratway will tell you, silence is only half the equation. You can be as quiet as the grave, but if you're standing in the middle of the Whiterun marketplace at high noon, draped in violently glowing spiked Daedric plate armour that smells faintly of sulphur and dead fish, people are still going to notice you. Conquering the auditory spectrum was merely the prologue. To truly become an apex predator, the Dragonborn must conquer the visual spectrum. They must learn to command the light itself, twisting it, breaking it, and ultimately forcing the universe to look entirely the other way. Welcome to the profound optical absurdity of the Fortify sneak enchantment. Our core in-game fact for the evening centres around the sheer, unadulterated engine-breaking potential of stacking this specific magic. Fortify sneak can be applied to 4 pieces of apparel: boots, gauntlets, a ring, and a necklace. Now, a standard store-bought ring of minor sneaking might help a novice thief lift a few apples from a distracted vendor. It provides a gentle nudge to the game's detection formula, but we are not novices. We are the architects of the deeply broken, alchemically hypercharged crafting loop we established earlier. When the Dragonborn drinks a potion of Fortify Enchanting that boosts their magical output by several million% and then applies Fortify Sneak to their gear, the resulting tooltip is a numerical monstrosity. It proudly declares that the wearer is now 7,400,000% harder to detect. At this mathematical threshold, the stealth mechanics of Skyrim completely and catastrophically collapse. Crouching no longer simply lowers your profile. It acts as a hard toggle switch for your very existence. You can stand in the middle of a sunlit road directly in front of a heavily armed Thalmor patrol, press the crouch button to bend your knees, and simply vanish from their tactical reality. But what is actually happening on a metaphysical level when the Dragonborn achieves this state of absolute, undeniable obscurity? To understand the nature of this shadow, we must look to our obscure lore for the evening and turn our gaze toward the Twilight Sepulchre, the hidden sanctuary of the Nightingales in the deepest reaches of Falkreath Hold. Here we find the Ebonmere, a direct physical conduit to the Evergloam, the realm of the Daedric Prince Nocturnal. Nocturnal is not merely a patron of thieves. She holds the title of Urdra, meaning she's recognised by many scholars as the oldest and most primordial of the Daedric princes. Her domain is the darkness that existed before the stars were torn into the sky. According to Nightingale texts, shadows in the Elder Scrolls universe are not simply areas where light fails to reach. They are the physical, encroaching substance of the Evergloam itself. When the Dragonborn enchants their armour with a hypercharged Fortify Sneak effect, they are not just trying to be quiet. They are actively tearing a microscopic rift into the Evergloam and pulling primordial, divine shadow stuff directly into Mundus. The enchantment coats the jagged edges of their Daedric armour in a thick supernatural membrane of unlight. They are wearing the literal physical manifestation of Nocturnal's domain. The universe looks at the Dragonborn and sees only a localised void, a tear in the canvas of reality that it desperately tries to ignore. This staggering manipulation of reality leads directly into one of the most beloved, wildly entertaining community debates surrounding the game's stealth mechanics. Fans have long argued over how this 1,000,000% sneak buff actually looks from the perspective of an NPC. Is it an optical phenomenon or a psychological one? The optical camouflage theory suggests that the magic violently bends photons around the Dragonborn's body, much like an advanced cloaking device or a chameleon spell from the earlier games. The Thalmor guard looks directly at you, but the light of the sun is magically routed around your armour, showing him only the pine trees behind you. You are, for all intents and purposes, entirely transparent. However, the far more popular, and infinitely more hilarious, theory is the perception filter debate. This theory posits that the Dragonborn does not become invisible at all. They are still physically present, fully rendered and aggressively visible. But the Fortify Sneak enchantment operates as a massive localized field of cognitive dissonance. Imagine the scene. The Dragonborn, clad in terrifying, soul-devouring armor, squats down directly in front of a Whiterun guard in broad daylight. The guard's eyes process the visual information perfectly. The image of the squatted demigod hits the guard's retinas. The optical nerve transmits this terrifying data to the brain, but before the guard can react, the enchantment forcefully hijacks his cognitive reasoning. His brain, overwhelmed by the magical compulsion, aggressively deletes the information to preserve its own sanity. The guard looks directly at the Dragonborn's spiked helmet, blinks, and his brain confidently tells him, "That is a very oddly shaped cabbage. Proceed with your patrol." The resulting physical comedy of this perception filter is a deeply chaotic joy. The Dragonborn can squat walk through a bandit encampment in the middle of the afternoon. They can casually approach a bandit sitting on a log, reach out and steal the cheese wheel directly from the bandit's hands. The bandit stands up, draws an iron sword, looks frantically at the terrifying, heavily armoured warrior squatting 3 inches from his kneecaps, and yells, "Who's there?" when the Dragonborn simply remains completely still, staring blankly upward into the bandit's eyes. The enchantment enforces the illusion. The bandit slowly sheathes his sword, shakes his head, and mutters, "Must have been the wind," before sitting back down to eat a piece of cheese that no longer exists. It is an act of supreme, humiliating psychological torture. You're not hiding from your enemies, you are forcing them to violently gaslight themselves. The tactical application of this visual dominance transforms the Dragonborn from a mere combatant into a horror movie monster. Imagine a forsworn camp deep within the craggy ravines of the Reach. The sun is setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the sacrificial altars. A forsworn Briarheart, a terrifying shaman with a literal jagged pinecone for a heart, is conducting a dark ritual surrounded by his most elite guards. The Dragonborn enters the camp. They do not run, they merely crouch and begin to roll. Because of the game's mechanics, a high-level sneak character can perform a forward somersault that propels them forward at a terrifying speed. To the forsworn, the camp is suddenly visited by a localized anomaly. A guard suddenly drops dead, his throat violently opened by an invisible blade. The Briarheart turns, screaming incantations, hurling explosive fireballs into the empty air. The Dragonborn simply rolls directly through the flames, completely mitigating the damage with their resist magic ring. They squat walk right up to the Briarheart. They are standing perfectly still in the flickering light of the campfire. The Briarheart looks around, confused, his magical senses entirely jammed by the dense, suffocating shadow stuff of the Evergloam clinging to the Dragonborn's armour. With a slow, deliberate motion, the Dragonborn reaches out, activates the game's unique pickpocket mechanic for this specific enemy, and simply rips the Briarheart's exposed, corrupted heart directly out of his chest cavity. The shaman collapses instantly, dead before he hits the dirt, utterly unaware that the architect of his demise was squatting politely directly in his field of vision. It is a level of stealth so profoundly broken, so entirely disconnected from the physical laws of nature, that it elevates the Dragonborn to a ghost that can casually dismantle entire armies without ever formally entering combat. Yet, as satisfying as it is to squat walk your way through the province, slitting throats and stealing sweet rolls from under the noses of the local constabulary, close quarters assassination remains a somewhat intimate affair. You still have to smell them. You still have to get blood on your impeccably forged gauntlets. For the truly refined, discerning demigod, getting within arm's reach of a dirty, unwashed bandit is simply uncivilized. If we have mastered the art of absolute silence, and we have commanded the shadows to erase our very existence from the visual spectrum, why should we ever bother closing the distance at all? Why risk the mud and the mess of a dagger when you can deliver instantaneous, catastrophic death from an entirely different zip code? It is time to uncurl from our crouching position, step out of the immediate vicinity and look to the horizon. It is time to string the bow. The intimate, terrifying art of the stealth takedown, squatting invisibly in the shadows and introducing a bandit's kidneys to a Daedric dagger, is a masterclass in psychological warfare. But let us be perfectly honest with ourselves. It is also incredibly messy. It requires you to inhabit the same physical space as your enemies. You have to endure the stifling odour of wet fur, stale mead and unwashed iron. You must listen to their mindless, looping complaints about the cold or their gambling debts. For the truly refined, ascending demigod, getting within arm's reach of a common cutthroat is not just dangerous, it is profoundly uncivilized. If we have already conquered the auditory and visual spectrums, erasing our acoustic footprint and wrapping our armour in the primordial shadow of the Evergloam, why should we ever bother closing the distance at all? Why risk the mud and the mess of melee combat when you can deliver instantaneous catastrophic death from an entirely different zip code? It is time to uncurl from our crouching position, step out of the immediate vicinity, and look to the horizon. We ascend to the lofty clinical perfection of the Fortify Archery enchantment. Picture the Dragonborn standing high atop the craggy, wind-scoured cliffs overlooking Valtheim towers. The air up here is thin, biting, and perfectly still. Far below, the river churns violently through the rocky gorge, and a small army of heavily armed highwaymen patrol the stone bridge, utterly unaware that the Angel of Death is currently doing trigonometry on a cliffside half a mile away. Our core in-game fact for the evening revolves around the devastating exponential mathematics of ranged combat. Just like the smithing and alchemy buffs we constructed earlier, the Fortify Archery enchantment can be applied to 4 distinct pieces of apparel: a helmet, a pair of gauntlets, a ring, and a necklace. Through our deeply broken alchemical feedback loop, each of these 4 pieces can be enchanted to increase bow damage by hundreds, thousands, or even millions of percentage points. But a bow does not operate in a vacuum. The true horror of this enchantment is realised when it is violently married to the sneak skill tree, specifically the deadly aim perk, which flatly multiplies the damage of any successful ranged sneak attack by 3. When you combine a base damage number that has been artificially inflated into the millions with a hard-coded 3x multiplier, you stop firing arrows and start firing localised extinction-level events. This staggering inevitable slide into range supremacy brings us to one of the most famous, universally acknowledged community debates in the entire history of the Elder Scrolls fandom, the Stealth Archer singularity. Fans have endlessly debated, memed and theorised about why almost every single Skyrim playthrough inevitably devolves into playing a Stealth Archer. You can start your journey with the firmest of intentions. You swear to the divines that this time you're going to play a heavily armoured orcish berserker wielding a 2-handed warhammer, or perhaps a pious Breton paladin who only uses restoration magic and a mace. You hold the line for 10, maybe 15 hours. But eventually you find yourself at the entrance of a massive echoing Falmer cave. You see 3 heavily armoured Chaurus Reapers skittering in the dark. You look at your warhammer. You look at the cheap wooden hunting bow you looted off a skeleton purely for pulling aggro. You think, I'll just crouch and fire 1 arrow just to thin the herd. And just like that, the singularity takes you. Fans debate whether this phenomenon is simply a symptom of imbalanced game design, or if it represents a fundamental law of psychological convergent evolution within the creation engine. The game's physics, the enemy pathing, the deeply satisfying tactile feedback of the controller vibrating as the string is pulled taut, everything in Skyrim subconsciously nudges the player toward the bow. The Stealth Archer is the crab of the Elder Scrolls universe. Given enough time, every build eventually evolves into it because it is the ultimate apex form of survival. To fully appreciate the gravity of a hyper-enchanted shot, we must look to the history of archery in Tamriel, delving into our obscure lore for the evening. When we think of legendary archers, we naturally look south, toward the dense, suffocating jungles of Valenwood and the Bosmer, the Wood Elves. The Bosmer are bound by the Green Pact, a strict religious mandate that forbids them from harming the plant life of their home province. Therefore, they cannot chop down trees to fashion their bows. According to the lore presented in the in-game book A Dance in Fire by Walken Jarth, traditional Bosmery bows are crafted entirely from bone, horn and animal sinew. These bows are incredibly stiff, possessing a draw weight so astronomically high that an average Imperial soldier couldn't even bend the string. Jarth's writings describe Bosmer warriors employing a terrifying full-body technique to fire their heaviest siege bows. A wood elf will lie flat on their back, plant both of their bare feet firmly against the massive bone riser of the bow, grip the string with both hands, and use the sheer combined leg and core strength of their entire body to draw the weapon back. It is a brilliant, terrifying display of kinetic output, capable of launching bone-tipped arrows with the penetrating force of a modern ballista. When the Dragonborn enchants their gauntlets and ring with hypercharged Fortify Archery magic, they are essentially replicating this mythic, full-body Bosmery siege technique with a casual flick of their wrist. The magic artificially amplifies the kinetic tension of the string to an impossible degree. The Dragonborn is standing casually, drawing a bow constructed from the femur of a dead dragon. But the tension stored in the sinew is equivalent to a siege engine being cranked by a dozen men. Let us return to the cliff overlooking Valdheim Towers and witness this terrifying physics equation in motion. The Dragonborn crouches, the evergloam shadow stuff wrapping around their armour, rendering them entirely invisible against the twilight sky. They draw the Dragonbone bow. The sound is a deep, agonizing creak of stressed marrow and screaming sinew. They hold their breath, utilizing the eagle eye perk to zoom their vision across the vast gorge. The crosshairs settle squarely on the chest of the bandit chief, who is currently sitting on a wooden chair upon the stone bridge, eating an apple. The Dragonborn releases the string. Instantly, the game engine recognizes the catastrophic math about to occur and triggers the cinematic kill cam. The camera violently detaches from the Dragonborn, zooming out and aggressively tracking the arrow as it slices through the crisp night air in glorious, agonizing slow motion. The dramatic orchestral score swells. The arrow spins, the fletching cutting perfectly through the wind. It is a masterpiece of digital cinematography, which makes it incredibly, profoundly hilarious when the camera tracks the arrow for 8 full seconds, only for the projectile to violently and loudly embed itself into the invisible, rectangular collision mesh of an ancient Nord urn that was sitting 2 feet to the left of your target. This is the ultimate, deeply relatable Skyrim joke, possessing the power to slay gods, calculating a sniper shot across a canyon, and being entirely thwarted by a transparent box surrounding a piece of decorative pottery. The bandit chief continues chewing his apple, completely unaware that a piece of bone travelling at Mach 3 just annihilated a bucket 30 yards away. But let us assume, for the sake of our demigod's dignity, that the arrow flies true. The kill cam tracks the projectile as it crosses the river. Because the Fortify Archery enchantment has scaled the base damage into the millions, the physical impact of the arrow fundamentally rejects standard Newtonian physics. When the Dragonbone arrowhead strikes the bandit chief in the centre of his iron cuirass, it does not merely pierce his heart. The sheer, overwhelming kinetic force of the shot hits him with the momentum of a runaway dwarven steam train. The bandit is violently ripped from his chair. He does not fall backward. He is aggressively launched horizontally off the stone bridge. His body skips across the surface of the churning river below, like a violently skipping stone, his limbs ragdolling wildly as the game's physics engine attempts, and entirely fails, to calculate the impossible momentum applied to his character model. He is dead before his body even clears the stone railing, his soul instantly sucked into the black soul gem in the Dragonborn's inventory. The Dragonborn watches the distant splash, slowly lowers the bow and lets out a soft, satisfied exhale. No messy blood on the gauntlets, no clashing of steel, just a quiet, clinical deletion of a life from a comfortable distance. It is the apex of efficiency. It is the undeniable, magnetic pull of the stealth archer singularity, perfected through the dark art of alchemical enchanting. But what happens when you grow tired of the distant clinical precision of the bow? Plinking enemies from the next holdover is amusing certainly, but sometimes the sheer, overwhelming quiet becomes boring. Sometimes you want to see the terror in their eyes. You want to feel the concussive, bone-rattling feedback of a heavy weapon connecting with an enemy's shield. What happens when you drop the bow, step out of the shadows, and apply this same exact, mathematically broken amplification to the brutal, chaotic dance of close-quarters melee? The clinical, distant perfection of the bow is undeniable. It is clean. It is flawlessly efficient. It allows you to dismantle an entire bandit operation while simultaneously enjoying a sweet roll on a cliffside half a mile away. But if we are being perfectly honest with ourselves, it is also a little bit lonely. When you delete a life from another zip code, you miss out on the rich, sensory details of the encounter. You miss the desperate, ragged breath of your opponent. You miss the terrified widening of their eyes and the heavy metallic clang of their desperate parries. For the truly discerning, ascending demigod, there comes a moment when the quiet, sterile superiority of the shadows becomes boring. Sometimes you simply want to uncurl from your crouching position, step directly into the roaring campfire light, and introduce a heavily armoured bandit to the absolute, unyielding reality of a Daedric mace. We leave the bow behind, step out of the Evergloam, and embrace the sheer, bone-shattering kinetic amplification of the Fortify one-handed enchantment. Our core in-game fact for the evening involves a fascinating, highly specific quirk of the enchanting system, one that has frustrated and amused adventurers for over a decade. When the Dragonborn decides to amplify their melee prowess, they can apply Fortify one-handed to 4 distinct pieces of apparel: their boots, their gauntlets, a ring, and a necklace. Using our deeply broken alchemical feedback loop, we can boost these enchantments to provide millions of percentage points of extra damage. A logical assassin might assume that this is the perfect time to pull out that paralysis enchanted ebony dagger we discussed earlier, hoping to turn a tiny swift blade into a weapon of mass destruction. But if you try this in the pristine, unmodded vanilla valleys of Skyrim, you will find yourself severely disappointed. Due to a glorious, duct-taped oversight within the creation engine's keyword registry, daggers are entirely excluded from the Fortify one-handed damage calculation. The engine simply refuses to recognize them as one-handed weapons in this specific context. They receive absolutely no benefit from your magical jewelry. It is a classic, beloved feature of the Northern Province. The universe strictly enforcing the rule that if you want to deal 7 million points of damage, you have to use a proper heavy weapon. You cannot break the world with a butter knife, and so, the Dragonborn reaches for a mace, specifically a Daedric mace, an ugly jagged lump of ebony infused with a demonic soul, heavy enough to dent a stone floor just by being dropped. But what exactly is the Fortify one-handed enchantment doing to the Dragonborn's arm? To understand this profound amplification of physical force, we must look away from the snowy peaks of Skyrim and gaze far to the west into the deep, esoteric history of our obscure lore for the evening. Long before the Nords built Whiterun, the continent of Yakuda was home to the ancient ancestors of the Red Guards. Among them were the Ansei, the legendary sword singers. These warriors did not merely swing steel, they achieved a state of absolute spiritual harmony with their weapons. The greatest of the Ansei could manifest a shihai, a spirit sword formed entirely from their own focused consciousness and life force. According to ancient Yokudan texts, a shihai could cut through the fundamental laws of physics, severing magical wards, turning aside natural disasters, and slicing through stone as if it were warm tallow. The Ansei achieved this through decades of ascetic discipline, meditation, and a profound philosophical alignment of the soul. When the Dragonborn equips a necklace enchanted with Fortify one-handed that was brewed under the influence of toxic, hypercharged salted fish water, they are entirely bypassing this noble spiritual discipline. The enchantment is the crude, brute force Nordic equivalent of a shihai. The Dragonborn is not singing to the sword, they are not achieving spiritual harmony, they are strapping a violently glowing magical battery to their bicep that aggressively forces their muscle fibers to contract with the kinetic output of a falling meteor. The magic artificially amplifies the momentum, density, and sheer crushing power of the swing, granting the Dragonborn the reality-cutting edge of an ancient Yakudan master, entirely unearned, simply because they spent an afternoon grinding alchemy in their basement. It is the arcane equivalent of achieving enlightenment by aggressively screaming at the universe's underlying math. This staggering, unearned kinetic output leads us directly into one of the most fiercely debated topics within the melee combat community. Fans have spent years endlessly arguing over the optimal one-handed combat style, the impenetrable defense of the sword and shield versus the relentless spinning blender of death that is dual-wielding. Proponents of the shield point to the absolute safety of the block skill tree, while dual-wielders worship the terrifying stamina-draining double power attack. The debate often centers on the animation lock, the agonizingly long, stationary spinning animation that a dual-wielding character is forced to perform when executing a power attack. In a normal playthrough, This spinning lock leaves you highly vulnerable to being shot by an archer or bitten by a dragon. But when your Fortify one-handed enchantments have scaled your base damage into the millions, this entire debate becomes fundamentally obsolete. You do not need to calculate DPS, damage per second, because you only ever need exactly one instance of damage. You don't need to spin, you don't need to block, you merely need to casually flick your wrist. This brings us to the true, horrifying comedy of the hyper-enchanted one-handed weapon, the physics of the melee kill cam. When the game engine registers that an enemy is at low health and your incoming swing is going to be fatal, it frequently seizes control of the camera. Time slows down. The camera angle shifts dynamically to showcase the brutal cinematic final blow. There is an entire set of animations specifically designed for decapitations, assuming the Dragonborn has unlocked the Savage Strike perk. In a standard, mathematically intended playthrough, the Dragonborn swings their weapon, strikes the enemy's neck, and the head cleanly severs, tumbling a few feet away into the mud. It is grim, realistic, and highly satisfying. But the creation engine is a beautifully fragile ecosystem. When calculating the physical momentum of a severed limb, the engine takes the total incoming damage of the strike and applies it directly as kinetic force to the detached object. Let us visualize this spectacular failure of digital physics. The Dragonborn casually strolls through the main gate of Fort Greymore. They are not sneaking. They are walking upright, their heavy, muffled Daedric boots making absolutely no sound, which only adds to the deeply unsettling aura of their approach. A heavily armoured orc bandit chief spots them from the courtyard. The chief roars, draws a massive steel great axe and charges with all the fury and weight of a runaway carriage. The Dragonborn stops. They do not raise a shield. They merely draw their enchanted Daedric mace and perform a simple, lazy, horizontal standing power attack. The kill cam triggers. Time grinds to a halt. The cinematic score swells, brass and drums hammering a dramatic crescendo. The Dragonborn's mace connects with the left side of the orc's thick green neck. Because the mace is currently registering a damage output of 4.2 million points, the engine calculates the force of the decapitation. The neck does not merely sever. The sheer, unfathomable kinetic energy applied to the orc's head turns the skull into a biological cannonball. The head violently detaches from the shoulders with a sound like a thunderclap. It instantly achieves terminal velocity, tearing a vacuum in the air as it launches perfectly horizontally. It blasts through the wooden palisade of the fort, shattering the heavy timber into splinters. It continues its trajectory, soaring over the western watchtower, entirely clearing the Whiterun tundra and rocketing up into the clouds. For a brief, magical moment, the bandit chief's severed head formally enters a lone orbit, joining the twin moons of Massa and Secunda in the night sky. Meanwhile, back in the courtyard, the kill cam ends. Time snaps back to normal speed. The orc's decapitated heavy body stands there for a fraction of a second, the game's physics struggling to understand where its centre of mass just went, before it simply crumples to the cobblestones like a dropped puppet. The Dragonborn slowly lowers their mace, taking a deep, calming breath. The raw, intimate crunch of close-quarters combat is deeply satisfying. They have mastered the art of reducing the mortal races of Tamriel into airborne projectiles. But as the Dragonborn explores the darkest corners of the map, they will inevitably encounter beings that are not of this world. Mortals, undead, and even dragons are ultimately bound by the physical rules of Mundus. If you hit them hard enough, they break. But what happens when you delve into a warlock's lair and find yourself face to face with a towering Dremora lord, summoned directly from the molten wastes of Oblivion? You could certainly decapitate them and launch their horned helmets into the stratosphere, but destroying a Daedra's physical form only sends their animus back to the void to reform over time. If you truly wish to insult a creature of Oblivion, simply beating them to death is inefficient. A true master of the Arcane knows that sometimes the most devastating weapon is not a mace that deals millions of damage, but a glowing, enchanted piece of legal paperwork. It is time to learn the art of the cosmic eviction notice. The Dragonborn steps over the deeply confused, violently decapitated corpse of the orc bandit chief and casually wipes the gore from their impossibly dense Daedric mace. Beating the mortal races of Tamriel into airborne, Low-orbit projectiles is a deeply satisfying application of hyperinflated mathematics. But mortals are bound by the fragile fleshy rules of Mundus. Their bones break, their blood spills, and eventually they stay down. As the Dragonborn delves deeper into the hidden subterranean corners of the province, perhaps descending into the foul echoing depths of Fellglow Keep, or ascending to the frozen blood-stained shrine of Mehrunes Dagon, they will inevitably encounter entities that do not care about mortal physics. A rogue conjurer, desperate and cornered, will raise a glowing purple hand and tear a jagged hole in the fabric of reality itself. From the sulphurous, molten wastes of Oblivion steps a Dremora Lord. Towering, clad in terrifying, jagged black iron, and possessing an arrogance that spans literal millennia, the demon raises a flaming greatsword and declares, with booming demonic authority, "I will feast on your heart!" You could, of course, hit him with your astronomically enchanted mace. You could shatter his infernal armour and launch his horned helmet over the nearest mountain range. But destroying the physical projection of a Daedra is merely treating the symptom. To truly break their spirit, you must attack their right to exist in your dimension. A true master of the arcane knows that sometimes the most devastating weapon is not a blunt instrument of death, but a glowing, enchanted piece of cosmic paperwork. We lower our mace, dim the torches, and gently explore the incredibly petty, wildly lucrative art of the Banish Daedra enchantment. Our core in-game fact for the evening centres around the sheer, unadulterated economic dominance of this specific magical effect. Within the mechanics of the creation engine, every enchantment is assigned a base gold value, which dictates how much the resulting item is worth to a merchant. Banish Daedra possesses the highest base value multiplier of any weapon enchantment in the entire base game. When applied to a weapon in combat, it does exactly what it says. It forcefully evicts summoned Daedra back to Oblivion up to a certain level. But its true, terrifying power is not wielded in a dungeon. It is wielded at a merchant's counter. Before we bankrupt the local economy, let us first examine the glorious, disrespectful combat application of this magic. To understand what happens when a banished weapon connects with infernal flesh, we must dive into our obscure lore for the evening and consult texts like Darkest Darkness and the Doors of Oblivion. According to these ancient scholars, Daedra are immortal. They are composed of chaotic creatia. When a Daedric physical form is destroyed on Nirn, whether by a sword, a fireball, or old age, their animus, their soul, is not destroyed. It is simply cast back into the waters of Oblivion, the chaotic void of their home realm, where they must endure a long, agonizing process of rebuilding a physical body. When a mortal conjurer summons a Daedra, they are not permanently bringing the creature to Nirn. They are casting an arcane tether, a magical rope woven from magicka, across the liminal barrier separating the dimensions. They lasso a Daedra, yank it through the veil, and bind it to their will for a few fleeting moments. When the Dragonborn strikes, that summoned Dremora with a banish enchanted weapon, they are not killing the demon. The enchantment acts as a pair of absolute, undeniable arcane scissors. It violently snips the conjurer's tether. The physical comedy of this interaction in the game engine is simply exquisite. The Dremora Lord is mid-swing, roaring his terrifying, heart-eating monologue. The Dragonborn doesn't even bother using their heavy Daedric mace. They simply draw a cheap iron dagger glowing with the banish enchantment and lightly poke the demon in the shin. Instantly, the tether snaps. The localized gravity of Mundus aggressively rejects the Daedra. There is a loud, undignified pop, much like a soap bubble bursting, accompanied by a swirl of purple light. The towering, terrifying Lord of the Deadlands does not die a warrior's death. He is simply vacuumed back to Oblivion mid-sentence, leaving the panicked, squishy, mortal conjurer staring in absolute horror at the glowing iron. Dagger in the Dragonborn's hand. It is the ultimate cosmic dismissal. You're not fighting the demon, you're simply refusing to sign for the package, returning it immediately to the sender. But as amusing as it is to instantly vaporize the physical manifestations of demonic lords, the true majesty of the Banish enchantment lies in its ability to completely, irreparably destroy the economy of Skyrim. Let us construct a scenario. The Dragonborn stands at an arcane enchanter in Whiterun. They have a massive pile of cheap, mundane iron daggers, forged from the scraps of metal found lying around the city. They have a handful of low-tier soul gems, petty and lesser gems filled with the unremarkable souls of mud crabs and skeever. The Dragonborn takes an iron dagger, worth perhaps 10 gold pieces on a good day. They weave the soul of a mudcrab into the blade, imprinting it with the Banish Daedra enchantment. When they pull the dagger off the altar, its value has miraculously, violently skyrocketed. That 10 gold piece of sharp scrap metal is now valued by the game engine at over 2,000 septims. The Dragonborn repeats this process, over and over. The soft, rhythmic hum of the enchanter fills the room as they convert a sack of mudcrab souls and garbage iron into the gross domestic product of a small nation. They fill a burlap sack with these wildly expensive, glowing butter knives. They then trudge down to the Whiterun marketplace and walk into Belethor's general goods. Belethor, a slightly sleazy Breton merchant, warmly welcomes the Dragonborn. The Dragonborn casually drops a single, Banish enchanted iron dagger onto the wooden counter. Belethor looks at the dagger. He looks at his entire life savings, the contents of his register, and the deed to his shop. He happily hands over every single gold piece he owns to purchase the mudcrab-infused piece of scrap metal. The Dragonborn then walks next door to Arcadia's cauldron, drops another dagger, and bankrupts the alchemist. They walk to the drunken huntsman and bankrupt the fletcher. They walk to the forge and bankrupt the blacksmith. In the span of 20 minutes, the Dragonborn has drained every single drop of liquid currency from the entire hold of Whiterun, leaving behind nothing but a surplus of hyper-expensive, highly specific demon-banishing shivs. This mechanical absurdity leads directly into one of the most deeply amusing, widely circulated fan theories in the Elder Scrolls community, the Banish Dagger economy. Fans endlessly debate why the merchants of Skyrim are so incredibly desperate to purchase these weapons. We are in the Fourth Era, the Oblivion crisis, where gates to the Deadlands opened across Tamriel and Daedric hordes poured out, ended over 200 years ago when Martin Septim shattered the Amulet of Kings. The liminal barriers are sealed. Daedric incursions in Skyrim are incredibly rare, mostly limited to a few reclusive warlocks in damp caves and the occasional shrine in the mountains. So why is Lucan Valerius, a humble merchant in the sleepy logging town of Riverwood, willing to mortgage his entire livelihood to buy a dagger specifically designed to banish demons that haven't been a global threat in 2 centuries? The fan theory posits that the collective trauma of the Oblivion crisis never truly faded from the cultural consciousness of Tamriel. The merchants are essentially historical preppers. They are absolutely terrified that the sky might tear open at any moment, raining fire and clan fear upon their shops. When the Dragonborn arrives offering a pocket-sized, easy-to-use Daedric eviction notice, the merchants view it as the ultimate insurance policy. An even darker branch of this theory suggests a massive province-wide money laundering scheme. Perhaps the merchants are acting as middlemen, hoarding these incredibly potent magical weapons to smuggle them south across the border into Cyrodiil, selling them at an exorbitant markup to the Old Merry Dominion or the Imperial Legion, both of whom are secretly preparing for a metaphysical arms race. The Dragonborn is unknowingly operating as the primary arms manufacturer for a Cold War being fought in the shadows of the continent. Whatever the true reason, the result is undeniable. The Banish Daedra enchantment provides the Dragonborn with infinite unconditional wealth. You can buy every house in the province, you can purchase every horse, every rare magical tome, and every sweet roll in existence, all funded by the souls of mildly annoyed mudcrabs. But as we stand atop a mountain of gold, clad in impenetrable armour, holding weapons that can sever the heads of mortals and the tethers of demons alike, a biological reality begins to set in. You can possess all the money in the world, you can hit with the force of a falling star, but swinging a massive Daedric mace, sprinting across the tundra and rolling through the shadows requires oxygen. It requires stamina. The mortal body, no matter how heavily enchanted the jewellery draped around its neck may be, still breathes. Muscles still burn with lactic acid. If the Dragonborn wishes to truly ascend, to become a perpetual, unyielding machine of war that never pauses, never tires, and never stops swinging, we must look to an enchantment that harvests the very breath from our enemy's lungs. We must become relentless. The Dragonborn stands victorious atop a staggering, economy-breaking mountain of gold, holding a glowing iron dagger that sends ancient demons whimpering back into the void. They are a master of the unseen shadows and the architect of zero-cost, apocalyptic magicka. Yet, beneath the impossibly dense Daedric armour, there remains a fragile biological truth. A heavily enchanted necklace does not pump blood. A ring of supreme magical resistance does not supply oxygen to straining lungs. When you swing a weapon with enough kinetic force to launch an orc into the stratosphere, the physical toll on the mortal vessel is immense. Muscles tear on a microscopic level. Lactic acid pools in the joints. The chest heaves, desperate for the thin, freezing air of the Gerald Mountains. If the Dragonborn wishes to truly ascend, to transition from a mere mortal conqueror into a perpetual, unyielding machine of war, they must eradicate the concept of exhaustion entirely. They must become relentless. We take a slow, deep breath and exhale softly as we explore the terrifying, suffocating mechanics of the Absorb Stamina enchantment. At a passing glance, stamina management in Skyrim feels like a harsh, unyielding warden. A warrior utilising a heavy weapon, or worse, dual-wielding two weapons simultaneously, relies entirely on the power attack. This lunging, highly committed strike deals massive damage and staggers the opponent, but it violently chunks away at the green bar at the bottom of the screen. When that stamina pool empties, the Dragonborn is reduced to breathless, agonisingly slow basic swings. They become a panting, vulnerable target, waiting helplessly for their lungs to catch up with their ambitions. But our core in-game fact for the evening reveals one of the most delightfully broken, fundamentally flawed, mechanical loopholes in the history of the creation engine. To execute a heavy power attack, the game does not require you to possess the entire stamina cost of that attack. It simply requires your stamina pool to be greater than 0. If a dual-wielding power attack mathematically demands 60 points of stamina, but the Dragonborn only has exactly one single point of stamina remaining, the game engine shrugs, says close enough, and allows the full, devastating animation to play out anyway. Therefore, a master enchanter knows that creating a weapon that absorbs 50 points of stamina per strike is a complete and utter waste of magical charge. Instead, the Dragonborn approaches the glowing arcane altar and binds the absorb stamina enchantment to their blade, deliberately dialing the magnitude all the way down to a mere 1 point. This microscopic, almost insulting siphon is enough to instantly refill that single, necessary pixel of green stamina every time the blade connects with flesh. The result is an infinite, inescapable loop. As long as the weapon is hitting a target, the Dragonborn can continuously chain devastating, bone-crushing power attacks until the end of time, entirely bypassing the biological need to ever stop and take a breath. But what exactly is the Dragonborn stealing when that sickly green light transfers from the victim into their own veins? To understand the profound, intimate cruelty of this magic, we must look to our obscure lore for the evening and gaze up at the churning grey skies over the throat of the world. To the ancient Atmorans and the modern Nords of Skyrim, stamina is not merely a biological measurement of oxygen and cardiovascular fitness, it is a deeply spiritual resource. According to the foundational Nordic pantheon, breath is a divine gift from Kine, the warrior widow of Shor and the mother of men. Kine is the goddess of the storm, the patron of hunters, and the deity who taught the ancient Nords how to harness their breath into the thuum, the voice. In Nordic theology, the wind in your lungs is literally the spirit of Kine moving through you. When a warrior fights with endurance and unyielding stamina, they are honouring her blessing. Therefore, when the Dragonborn strikes a bandit with an absorbed stamina weapon, they are not just making the bandit physically tired, they are performing a highly blasphemous, localised spiritual theft. They are reaching into the victim's chest and aggressively siphoning Kine's divine wind directly out of their soul. The victim doesn't just feel out of breath, they experience a sudden, terrifying spiritual suffocation. It is the Arcane, equivalent of forcibly inducing a severe asthma attack on your opponent, while you simultaneously run a marathon and do jumping jacks over their dying body. This staggering exploitation of the stamina mechanic leads us directly into one of the most hilarious, fiercely contested community debates in the history of Tamriel, the Great Vegetable Soup Singularity. Fans endlessly debate the absolute necessity of the absorb stamina enchantment, entirely because of the existence of a single, deeply unassuming culinary recipe. If you take a cabbage, a potato, a leek, and a tomato to a cooking pot, you produce vegetable soup. In the game engine, drinking this soup provides a passive buff that regenerates exactly 1 point of health and 1 point of stamina per second for 12 uninterrupted minutes. Because of the 1 point of stamina to power attack engine quirk, eating a single bowl of this warm, rustic broth grants the Dragonborn the exact same infinite power attack loop as a heavily enchanted Daedric weapon, infused with a grand soul. The lore implications of this are endlessly entertaining to the community. You have a god-tier warrior, draped in the shadow of Nocturnal, capable of summoning apocalyptic firestorms, who draws their terrifying, jagged swords to face down a legendary dragon. But before the battle begins, they politely ask the dragon to wait a moment while they hastily chug 3 bowls of lukewarm cabbage water. The community theorizes that the true source of the Dragonborn's mythic power isn't their dragon blood or their mastery of the arcane. It is simply a diet incredibly high in root vegetables and dietary fibre. They are not a magical engine of destruction. They are just a very soupy demigod with flawless digestion. Whether fueled by the trapped soul of a mammoth or the hearty comforts of a home-cooked stew, the physical application of this relentless endurance is a sight of pure, unending carnage. Let us picture the combat loop. The Dragonborn is dual-wielding 2 ancient Nordic war axes, both glowing with the faint, sickly green aura of the Absorb Stamina enchantment. They drop into a cramped stone chamber deep within the ruins of Labyrinthian, immediately surrounded by a half-dozen restless Draugr Deathlords. These are ancient, hardened warriors, capable of shouting the Dragonborn across the room with a single word. Normally, this is a highly tactical encounter, requiring blocking, dodging, and careful resource management. But the Dragonborn is a relentless machine. They close the distance and trigger the dual-wield power attack, a terrifying, spinning flurry of steel that strikes 3 times in a fraction of a second. The axes bite deep into the dried, leathery flesh of the first Draugr. The 1 point of stamina is siphoned. The green bar at the bottom of the Dragonborn's vision flickers, instantly validating the next attack. The Dragonborn does not pause. They do not reset their stance. They instantly flow into a second identical spinning flurry, and then a third and a fourth. The sheer kinetic force of the continuous power attacks permanently staggers the Draugr. The undead warriors are physically incapable of raising their ancient ebony shields or drawing the breath required to shout. They are caught in a violent, inescapable meat grinder of enchanted metal. The chamber echoes with the wet, heavy thwack of axes cleaving bone, a rhythmic, unbroken drumbeat of localized butchery. The Dragonborn spins through the room like a heavily armoured, deeply angry blender, their lungs perfectly full, their muscles entirely free of fatigue. They carve through the entire room of elite undead without once stopping to breathe, leaving a pile of pulverized bone dust and shattered armour in their wake. It is the ultimate expression of aggressive dominance. You're not just defeating your enemies, you are denying them a single, uninterrupted turn to act. You become a tidal wave of steel that simply never crests, washing away any obstacle through the sheer, unyielding volume of your strikes. We have now forged a weapon that strikes with the force of a falling star, a bow that snipes from the horizon, armour that entirely negates magical trauma, and a ring that renders us entirely invisible. We have even conquered the very concept of physical exhaustion, allowing us to swing our blades until the sun burns out. But for all our reality-breaking exploits, for all the salted fish water we have consumed and the shadows we have woven into our boots, the universe of Tamriel is still fundamentally chaotic. Sometimes, an invisible demigod trips a hidden wire in a Dwemer ruin, dropping a massive boulder on their head. Sometimes the kill cam math fails, and an enemy manages to land a single, desperate, unblocked strike with a 2-handed warhammer, when the illusions fail, when the stealth breaks, and when the raw, unforgiving kinetic force of the world actually manages to connect with our mortal shell. We must ensure that the flesh beneath the armour simply refuses to yield. It is time to step away from the offensive arts and construct the final, definitive failsafe. It is time to forge the immortal flesh. We have built a machine of perpetual motion, a silent, invisible demigod wielding the kinetic force of a falling star and the stamina of a hurricane. But for all our reality-breaking exploits, for all the salted fish water we have consumed and the shadows we have woven into our boots, the universe of Tamriel remains fundamentally chaotic and deeply unfair. Sometimes the illusion fails. Sometimes an invisible demigod trips a hidden wire in a Dwemer ruin, dropping a massive spiked bronze boulder directly onto their head. Sometimes the kill cam math glitches, and a desperate bandit manages to land a single, unblocked strike with a 2-handed iron warhammer right between your shoulder blades. When the shadows recede, when the magical wards shatter, and when the raw, unforgiving kinetic force of the world actually manages to connect with our mortal shell, we must ensure that the flesh beneath the armour simply refuses to yield. It is time to step away from the offensive arts, put down the mace, and construct the final, definitive failsafe. It is time to forge the immortal flesh. We arrive at the 15th and final jewel in our arcane crown, the Fortify Health enchantment. Our core in-game fact for the evening defines the canvas upon which we paint this masterpiece of survival. The Fortify Health enchantment can only be bound to 4 specific pieces of equipment: your chest armour, a shield, a necklace, and a ring. In a standard, mathematically respectful playthrough, applying a grand soul to these items might grant a warrior an extra 100 hit points, enough to survive perhaps 1 additional fireball or a glancing blow from a cave bear. It is a comfortable buffer, a polite safety net. But we are not polite. We are the architects of the Fortify Restoration Alchemy loop. We have already broken the universe's calculator. When the Dragonborn drinks a potion that amplifies their enchanting skill by 7 million%, and they apply Fortify Health to a gold diamond ring, the resulting piece of jewellery does not merely provide a buffer, it fundamentally rewrites the biological capacity of the wearer. The tooltip casually states that your health is increased by 8,400,000 points. The red bar at the bottom of your screen ceases to be a measurement of your mortality. It becomes a vast, unfathomable ocean of vitality, a Mariana Trench of raw hit points that no creature in Nirn could ever hope to empty. What is actually happening to the Dragonborn's body when they slip this ring onto their finger? To understand the sheer grotesque biological manipulation at play, we must delve into our obscure lore for the evening and examine the deeply forbidden esoteric art of flesh magic. Centuries ago, deep within the Shivering Isles, the brilliant and unhinged Dunmer sorceress Relmina Veronim pioneered the manipulation of what she called the 6th element, mortal flesh. True flesh magic, a twisted offshoot of alteration and necromancy heavily utilised by the ancient Aelids, involves manually tearing bodies apart, chemically treating the tissue, and weaving it back together with magicka to create hulking, grotesque flesh atronachs. It is a wet, agonising, deeply horrific science that requires scalpels, vats of brine, and a complete disregard for the sanctity of life. The Dragonborn, however, bypasses this messy surgical theatre entirely. By binding the concept of raw vitality into a mundane metal band, they're applying a highly localised synthetic form of flesh magic directly to their own cellular structure. When the ring slides over their knuckle, their internal biology violently reinforces itself. Muscle fibres become as dense as ebony, bones calcify into a substance harder than diamond. The heart does not just pump blood, it pumps localised liquid invulnerability. The Dragonborn essentially turns a gaudy piece of jewellery into a wireless, magical life support system. The physical comedy of this unyielding biological density is deeply satisfying. Picture the Dragonborn casually strolling through the ancient, echoing corridors of Bleakfall's Barrow. They carelessly step on a pressure plate, the heavy, spiked wooden gate designed to crush grave robbers into paste, violently swings down from the ceiling. It strikes the Dragonborn directly in the face. Instead of a sickening crunch of bone, there is a loud, splintering crack of dry wood. The trap violently shatters into a dozen pieces against the Dragonborn's nose. The Demigod merely blinks, mildly annoyed, plucking a wooden splinter from their cheek before continuing down the hallway, utterly unbothered by the architectural assassination attempt. Or imagine wandering the Whiterun tundra and picking a fight with a giant. The giant raises its massive bone-crushing club and brings it down on the Dragonborn's head. The fabled Skyrim space program, where the kinetic force of a giant's club launches a player hundreds of feet into the air, is entirely predicated on the player dying from the impact. But because the Dragonborn possesses 8 million hit points, they do not die. They simply absorb the blow. The club bounces off their skull with a dull thud. The giant stares in absolute terrified bewilderment at a tiny mortal who just face-tanked a tree trunk and is now gently asking if they have any mammoth cheese to spare. But this staggering godlike vitality comes with a terrifying permanent cost. This leads us directly into one of the most tragic, highly cautioned community debates surrounding the Fortify restoration loop, the unequipped death trap. Fans have endlessly documented the horrifying mathematical reality of relying on this exploit. Let us say your natural base health is 300. You put on the heavily enchanted ring, and your maximum health becomes 8,300. During a dungeon crawl, you fall off a cliff, get chewed on by a dragon, and step on a rune trap, taking a total of 1,000 points of damage. Your current health is now 7,999,300. You are perfectly fine. You are still a god. But then, you travel back to Solitude to attend your own wedding. You decide it would be inappropriate to wear your heavily enchanted, world-breaking combat gear to the Temple of the Divines. You open your inventory, you unequip the ring. Instantly, the game engine subtracts the 8 million bonus maximum health from your current total. The math is brutal and unforgiving. Your health instantly drops to negative 700. Before the menu screen even closes, the Dragonborn lets out a pained groan and collapses to the floor, instantly dead of catastrophic full-body organ failure simply because they took their jewellery off. The community views this as the ultimate poetic curse of hubris. The enchantment does not just protect your life, it completely hijacks it. You are permanently tethered to the armour. You have become the Darth Vader of Tamriel, a tragic synthetic immortal bound forever to a cursed life support suit of your own making, completely incapable of ever changing your clothes without instantly dissolving into dust. It is the perfect, darkly comedic culmination of our arcane journey. We have achieved absolute mastery over the elements, the shadows, the economy, and death itself. But in doing so, we have locked ourselves inside our own creation. And so, the grand, chaotic symphony of the Arcane Forge finally begins to quiet. The roaring, white-hot coals of the Skyforge settle into a soft, glowing ember, casting long, gentle shadows across the snowy tundra of Whiterun. The frantic, desperate energy of the dungeon crawl fades, replaced by the deep, rhythmic breathing of a world slowly drifting to sleep. You have conquered the chaotic magics of Solstheim, woven the velvet darkness of the Evergloam around your shoulders, and bent the very stars of Aetherius to your quiet will. The armour is heavy, yes, but it is also a cocoon, a perfect, impenetrable sanctuary where nothing in the waking world can ever reach you, nor harm you. Picture your Dragonborn returning to the quiet warmth of a hearth in the pale north. The heavy Daedric boots are set aside, resting silently on the wooden floorboards. The jagged, terrifying weapons that once severed the tethers of demons and shattered the bones of ancient worms are hung neatly on their iron racks, their glowing runes dimming to a faint, peaceful hum. Outside, the freezing winds of the Gerald Mountains howl and bite at the frost-rimmed glass, but inside the fire crackles softly, casting a warm, golden light over the room. There are no more dragons to chase tonight, no more ancient crypts to plunder or shadows to command. The relentless mathematics of survival no longer matter. All that remains is the profound, comforting stillness of a journey completed. Let the chill of the northern winds fade from your mind. Let your breathing slow, matching the quiet, eternal heartbeat of the snowy mountains. The province is safe, the doors are locked, the night is perfectly still. Sweet dreams.